Hi everybody. Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to the first event of the MIT Forum in the academic year Tafshin Samech. I would like to welcome Ed Malawski, Chairman of the MIT Forum, to say a few words of welcome. Thank you, Ed. Well, a few words about Ed. Ed is the founder and chairman of Gemini Israel Funds and the chairman of the MIT Enterprise Forum of Israel. Prior to founding Gemini, Ed served from 1972 to 1992 as executive director of the Israel-U.S. Binational Industrial Research and Development Foundation, known as the Bird Foundation. Ed has a first-class honors BSc degree in chemistry from 1950 and a PhD in physical chemistry from 1953. That's quick. From Queen Mary College, University of London. His publications include 53 scientific and technical papers and 24 patents, plus many foreign applications. In February 1994, Technion, Israel Institute of Technology, conferred upon him an honorary doctorate. In April 2003, Ed received the Israel High-Tech Award from the Israel Venture Association in recognition of his unique contribution to the development of the Israel high-tech industry. Ed is the chairman of the MIT Enterprise Forum of Israel. He is widely recognized as one of the founding fathers of Israeli high-tech and venture capital, in which field he was recently named in the Israeli business press as one of the 5 most influential people in the country, and we're very proud to have him here. Thank you, Ed.
Actually, that's what this meeting was really all about, so you can all go now if you'd like. If you decide to stay, there's a very interesting program for you. Since all of you, I think, at one time or another, or many of you, will have to negotiate with somebody about something. And that class of negotiation includes one of the more problematical issues facing early stage companies or younger, even not so young people, dealing with very large companies. Very large companies. This is a very difficult, chancy business. If you learn a few rules of thumb today, just 2 or 3 things which help you, you would have found the time you spent to have been worthwhile. I think I should add that what you really need, which some of the other speakers may not cover, is chutzpah. And I have found myself, having been in this position of having to negotiate with supergiants once in a while, that sheer chutzpah is a very important element. Nobody will treat you better than you treat yourself. Nobody will think more of you than you project. So you better learn how to look good and sound good. You have a wonderful program. We're running a bit late, so I'm going to hand it straight over to our incredibly efficient executive director, Ella, who, why do you do this still? You must be crazy. Anyway, Ella will tell you a bit about the MIT Forum, which is really a wonderful organization, as evidenced not least by the kind of turnout you can get on a nice sunny day when one could be at the beach, for things as gutsy as how to negotiate with giants. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed. This event is being held together with Greenberg Traurig International Law Firm, with 1,750 lawyers worldwide, active in the US, Asia, and Europe, who has won the US Law Firm of the Year last year. I wish to thank Greenberg Traurig for doing this event with us. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Bob. And I also wish to thank all of our sponsors, mainly the Leon Recanati Graduate School of Business Administration, with which we're cooperating, our supporters, Aladdin and Rad, our in-kind supporters, Haaretz, Golan Winery, PwC, Kesselman, the Former Group, and everybody else who's helping us do what we're doing. Improving your negotiation positions, rule for negotiating with giants. We stay in constant touch with our audience, and we often talk to them and ask them about things that bother them, things that they want to learn about, and this is a topic that we find everybody's interested in. A couple of words about the MIT Enterprise Forum. The MIT Forum was started at MIT, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, near Boston, Massachusetts. A widespread organization with 24 chapters worldwide. Here you can see the chapters in black and the viewing sites in red 3 times a year. The MIT Forum has a global broadcast with a satellite that unfortunately doesn't cover Israel. However, I'm not sure you'd come and watch the program at 2 o'clock in the night. But we are going to hold one of their events, Talk to an Angel, which was broadcasted, will take place here. This is our November event, October event, October 28th. You're very welcome to write this down on your calendars. I visited our headquarters last month. It was a great meeting, and I realized that what I was telling you all was true. We are doing really well worldwide within the MIT Forum body. A global organization with a very good network. We have started working with the London chapter recently. A couple of entrepreneurs on our board will be going there in November to give a lecture. We'll be participating in a program in Atlanta, and we hope one day to do business with a newly incorporated chapter in Pakistan and with our neighboring chapter in Lebanon. Professional, on and off stage, you know the people on stage. Some of you know the build-up of our board of advisors, board of directors. We have excellent people in the audience. Thank you all for honoring us in this event. The MIT Forum holds conferences, workshops, and consulting. We had an excellent workshop with repeat entrepreneur Gidi Barak last year, which we're going to repeat now. It will start soon after Sukkot. We're inviting any of you who are very early stage entrepreneurs and who'd like to be part of this program minted by Gidi Barak to approach us and join this program. The consulting activity is the activity I actually view as our most important. In the consulting, which is heavily sponsored by our sponsors, we provide companies with a 2-hour brainstorming session with a wish list panel of their choice. We discuss the choice of panel together, and companies find this extremely The reason to come is mainly because you want to save time and do less mistakes, running up the learning curve rather than crawling. Negotiating with giants. We know how important this is. We held 200,000 books. If you'll type negotiating in Google, you'll find more than 31 million links. Aren't we all negotiators? Like it or not, we are. And with the world going flat, less people are ready to take other people's decision, and you have to negotiate all the time, with the goal of getting what you deserve and being fair and maintaining a good relationship with your negotiation party. Some negotiations are possible, others are probable, and others are impossible. We hope you don't get a proposal that you cannot, an offer you cannot refuse. In any case, sometimes when you go to a very hard negotiation, you have to take into account that this may be, you might not get an offer that you can take, and you have to think your batna, your best alternative to no agreement. If we're looking at the goals, you want to be efficient in the process. and you want to get a fair deal, a win-win deal, as much as this is possible, and maintain relationships, all this keeping cultural differences in mind. If we're talking of cultural differences, sometimes you have a cultural difference with your children. The Give a Time Country Club once had an advert saying, 2 kids free of charge. And my 8-year boy looked at this and he said, do they come from a family that doesn't really want their kids? 2 kids free of charge. Okay? When you sign a negotiation, it's not just an end, it's really a new beginning. Okay? You start a new relationship, and for this matter, you really need to protect your negotiation partner and often leave something on the table, something that we're not always very good at. And as Paul Getty's father said, you must never try to make all the money that's in the deal, that the other fellow makes some money too, because if you have the reputation of always making all the money, you won't have many deals. Today we brought a lot of different points of view to the table. We have the giant stock on the first part with Miki Ode of IBM talking about the expectations of the large company, with Ed Malawski of Gemini, the VC, talking about whether you can discuss the terms with VCs altogether. We have Philip Ulmer talking about financial aspects, and we'll have Gary Epstein talking about negotiation practices. And in the second part we'll have Bob Grassman moderating, with 4 entrepreneurs bringing their personal stories and points of view, with Ronnie Ross, who sold Panorama to Microsoft and lived happily ever after, with Igal Rotem, who sold, who built Power Design through a lot of joint venture agreements and eventually sold the company to Microsemi for $250 million, with Eyal Herzog of Meta Cafe, surviving the elephant's path really, and with Arnon Dinour of M Systems, now SanDisk, who was really in charge of the negotiations that took part between M Systems and SanDisk. M Systems was eventually sold to SanDisk for $1.5 billion. What are we going to discuss? Well, how do I protect yourself? When do I open the kimono when dealing with a large company, or when talking with a VC? How do I know that the VC doesn't take my ideas and give them to one of his portfolio companies? How do I go about an OEM agreement, and how do I make them respect me now and in future? What portion of the deal can I do face-to-face, and at what point in time do I have to add a lawyer? These questions and more will all be discussed this afternoon. And I would like to ask Gary Epstein now of Greenberg Traurig to come to the podium. Yep. Is this any better? Tertov? No? Tertov? Okay. Gary Epstein has 11 grandchildren. He considered that his major accomplishment. Among his minor accomplishments, he is the head of Greenberg Traurig's global corporate and securities practice, which includes about 400 attorneys in 28 offices. He is the co-head of the firm's Israel practice. He represented the Seminole tribe of Florida in a $1 billion acquisition of Hard Rock Cafe, the first major off-reservation acquisition for a Native American tribe. He represented Live Nation in its recent $130 million deal with Madonna and its deals with U2, Shakira, and Jay-Z. He has never eaten in a Hard Rock Cafe or attended a rock concert. I'm sorry about that. But Gary, the floor is yours. Thank you.
You'll have to forgive me. I'm having post-trauma stress disorder. Before I went to law school decades ago, I taught literature at Iowa State University, and being back on campus and seeing all these young, fresh faces is causing me great trauma. It's deja vu. I was a very, very popular teacher among the students, but not the faculty, because I thought that if people were stupid, they would suffer enough in life without bad grades. So I used to give very high grades, which made me very popular, and then I stopped teaching and went to law school. Bati la'aretz b'yom revi'i b'layla. I came to Israel Wednesday night. There was still a Lehman Brothers. There was still a Merrill Lynch. I did not know that my departure would have a profound impact on the world economy. I feel very guilty and responsible for what's going on over there, and therefore we're going to try very hard to give a productive and meaningful presentation today so that you can all go forth and rebuild the world economy. 10 minutes ago I got an email that Goldman's earnings are down 70%. So, I mean, if it happens to Goldman, there may be no refuge. Potchin b'chvod achsania. We would like to thank Ella Matalon and her terrific staff, Efrat and Aya and the rest of them, for organizing this event in such a professional manner. It is a privilege for our firm to be associated with the MIT Forum, and we look forward to a long and productive association. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you.
As Ella said, Greenberg Traurig is Chevrat Orchei Din, Shel Elef Shmona Meyot Orchei Din. We are in 32 countries, and I and my colleagues Bob Grossman and Meital Stavinsky have been coming to Israel for the last 7 years, since the height of the Second Intifada, with the goal primarily of introducing Israeli companies to our client base of 50,000 clients, and we think we've been very successful, and we hope for greater success in the future. Oleh Hadash yashav b'mirpeset shelo v'ra'a tapuzim be'etz shel shcheno amad v'lakach shlosha tapuzim v'hitchil le'echol. Hashachen ra'a v'ratz mebeito v'za'ak Adoni katuv b'Torah lo tignov. Ha'oleh hadash chiyech ve'amar li'ishto ma na'im lanu agur ba'artzenu ha'kedosha ochlim tapuzim v'shomim divrei Torah. The essence of that joke is the most important thing that you need to think about is communication and knowledge and getting on the same wavelength with the entity sitting across the table. You and the giant need to be speaking the same language, and I'm going to stress this over and over and over again. The most success comes from positioning yourself across the table and understanding what the other side wants and needs from the transaction. And it is not always antagonistic. Obviously there are always price differentials, obviously there are timing, there are concerns that buyers and sellers have that are different. But if you understand the motivations and needs and goals of the other party, you can compromise in order to achieve your own goals and needs. And only rarely, price being one of them occasionally, are there a direct contradictory interests. So the first thing you need to do as an entrepreneur, and the first part of this seminar, I guess, is about giants, is that you need to understand, you need to gather information about the giants. And you can't have a negotiation strategy without knowledge. It is easy to gather knowledge about the giants, much less so about the entrepreneurs. Most of the giants are public. Most of the giants have done other acquisitions. You need to understand, you need to do research the same way you do in your own field on the entity that's coming to the table with the checkbook or with the stock. What is their acquisition strategy? If I just talk aloud, would that be enough, or do I?
I'll turn this down.
No.
No, if you want to be heard here, give it a try.
See, again, when I was teaching, nobody cared. I think the best lecture I ever gave, I spoke for 40 minutes. I was compelling, I was funny, I was dramatic, I was, if I say so myself, terrific. And when I concluded, I said, does anyone have any questions? And a young lady in the back of the room said, what time is it? So, you need to know the acquisition strategy of the giant. What are they looking for? Are they looking for a technology that would cost them too much or take too long to build? Are they looking for market share? That can you bring market share to them, and what value will that bring? Are they looking for a product? Do they have a distribution network and a gap in their product line that you can provide and add immediate value? I am in the midst of a negotiation right now where the giant has an enormous distribution network, and my client's product would fit right into it. And with almost no additional cost, the purchaser would be able to add a significant amount to its bottom line. My client sells about $5 million worth of goods every year. And it is entirely conceivable that if they sell their company or make a deal with the giant, that $5 million could go to $50 million. What is the giant willing to pay when it's bringing all the value added? It knows that if my client stays independent, the $5 million will go to $6 million, will go to $7 million. It doesn't have the capital to expand. It doesn't have the distribution network. And therefore, the giant has come in and offered a very low amount for a significant equity stake in the company. And my client is offended because it is clearly worth less than what the company is worth now. But at the end of the day, my client would have 51% of a company that might arguably worth 10 times what it's worth today. Those sort of factors, again, what are they looking for? What am I looking for? As Ella said, what are my alternatives? And do I really want to stand on my dignity and honor and say, I will not take a price that's below what I think my company is worth. I would rather wind up with a lower value at the end of the day. And you see that occasionally. I'm accustomed to seeing it in Cubans because I'm in Miami, but I understand Israelis are not all that dissimilar from Cubans. So it happens that there are people let their egos get involved in deals, and they also know what their neighbors got for their exit. And you don't want to be the only person in Ra'anana without 6 exits. So it's tough. Is there? And another anecdote that I can tell is sometimes, again, understanding what the giant is coming to the table with. I had a medical device company that was in the hematology business and conducted an auction, and with all the appropriate players in the medical device business and the doctor's office business, and the leading player was the high bidder. And the entity that was trying to catch up to the leading player couldn't really justify paying a higher price. But I could tell in the course of the negotiation that the leading player in the field wanted to buy the device so that it would not wind up in the hands of a competitor and that it would never come to market. And I told my client, make sure you get enough money up front because you're never going to see a penny of royalties. And they said, you're crazy, our device is so much better than their device. And I said, they don't care. They've got 80% market share. They're going to keep 80% market share for the next 5 years, and they'll pay you $10 million and go away. But you'll make sure you get enough on the downstroke that you're satisfied, because I guarantee you that you're never going to see another penny if you sell it to them. And they sold it to them, and they never saw another penny. And some of them were satisfied, and some of them weren't. But again, the critical element with the oranges and knowing what your neighbor wants is understanding what the motivation, because then you can negotiate effectively. If it's an acquisition, Do they typically use stock or cash? What's their multiple? What is their stock? They're not going to pay you a higher multiple than their stock is trading at. There are certain limits. Will they give you freely tradable stock? If their stock is at a 52-week low, that's what it's worth. So when they come in telling you that, don't worry, it's at its 52-week low, it's going to go up, and you're going to make $1 million, you need, and we'll talk later, if I have time, about how to negotiate to protect yourself if you get buyer stock, either through a put or through issuance of additional stock in the future if you're not, if the stock does not go up. What is their culture? How many acquisitions have they completed in the last 2 years? How many negotiations have they been in that have not been completed? Are they anxious to have you talk to people who they've bought in the past? If they're not, worry. If they want you to talk to people that they've acquired in the past, you need to take advantage of that. From the giant side, how do I justify the valuation? It's very interesting that people who work for large corporations have two motivations, and perhaps the greatest one is not to be embarrassed, not to lose their job. We compete for business all the time with giant law firms from New York, and frequently a general counsel will tell us, I will hire you to do my $200 million acquisition and my $500 million acquisition, but when it's a $10 billion acquisition, I'm going to a big New York law firm, because anytime anything can go wrong, and I want to be able to go to the board of directors and say, hey, I hired Cravath, Swaine & Moore. It's protection. You need to understand that the person on the opposite side of the table does not want to buy a company that doesn't succeed, because their career is on the line. So you want to get rich, and they want to keep their job. And they don't want to be embarrassed. How do I make sure when I'm negotiating with an entrepreneur that they are not just using me to establish a price and shopping to the competition? How do I make sure that the necessary personnel stays around and stays committed, and that I'm getting the necessary personnel? Who's really the brains of the outfit? How can I make sure that I'm licensing the right product line? Should I pay for value that I create if I'm an OEM or if I'm a distributor? And one critical concern that entrepreneurs frequently don't think about, are these people going to be able to maintain accounting controls? If I'm compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley, do they really, is the accounting in good order? And one of the most important things when you go into a negotiation is that you look professional, that you know how to play the game, that you've got the right accountants, certainly the right lawyers, that you understand that is the due diligence already arranged in a data room in a form that they can come in, that you've already know exactly what their lawyers and business people are going to ask for. Here's the due diligence available. That's going to give them a tremendous level of comfort. They want to know whether you're sophisticated enough to negotiate a standard contract. Ed is going to talk in a minute about what is negotiable and what's not negotiable. And it's important to the giant to know that the entrepreneur understands what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. Am I going to have to restate their financial statements? If you know their concerns and you address their concerns before they raise them, you raise the chance of having a successful negotiation. Both sides need to know not only what their objectives are, but what the objectives of the other party are in order to have a successful negotiation. And you also need to know what is the absolute minimum that you need to get from the deal, and to draw a line and say, if I can't get this, I walk. But if I can get this, notwithstanding the fact that I haven't gotten anything, I can achieve my objectives and go on. No one is typically trying to insult anyone in these transactions. No one is trying to cheat anyone. You simply need to determine, putting emotion aside, whether this, and again, Ella sort of said this, you need to determine whether this is a deal that you want to do or need to do. Are you better off with the deal on the table, as bad as it is, or without a deal at all? So, and of course you need to know what your alternatives are and what the giant's alternatives are. One of the giant's great advantages is typically they don't have to do a deal. Ein Breira is not a good position to be in. The giant rarely is in that position. The entrepreneur is. You may do a deal at a lower valuation to get to enable you to get to the next stage. Is it better for my client to go to from 5 to 7 to 9 and own 100% of the company, or to go from 5 to 50 and own 51% of the company? What's your gut? Which one do you think they should stay independent and grow organically and slowly, as opposed to 49? What they're actually asking is 49 and an option for the other 51. and if you want to know, the option is whatever price they determine. So, I mean, yeah, there is always a negotiation, and there always is. But the question is, are you willing to take less? Clearly less than the other side acknowledges it's less. General Electric, I shouldn't mention names, it's being taped. Cancel that. Some company, very famous, used to come to the table, they're a client, I'm embarrassed, used to come to the table and say, yeah, we may be offering somewhat less than somebody else, but simply associating with us is going to make your company more valuable. And it was quite conceivably true. It was the client didn't want to hear it. Why should I sell it for less to them just because they're a big company? Because sometimes they bring value added. I mean, if you can get an investment from Ed Molovsky, that means something. It means they've gone through a due diligence. It means that they've done your...
You haven't shopped around.
I was going to say Kleiner Perkins, but Ed's sitting here. In any event, there is no transaction that happens that doesn't involve some level of mutual benefit. Zen makes sense. The deal doesn't happen. And you need to keep that in mind. It is rare that both sides have equal bargaining power, but the assumption of this session is that the giant is always going to have greater leverage, and we hope to demonstrate ways... How much time do I have left?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. In the next 5 to 7 minutes, I will show you how to level the playing field. The first technique is knowledge. You need to understand, you have to have market savvy. We met an Israeli company called Evogene that you people have been reading about in the newspapers some time ago, for quite some while. They were designing genes for plants, not clothing, but the other kind of gene. So that for agricultural purposes, better taste, endurance, yield. All of a sudden, they were designing genes for plants to increase the oil content for biofuels. Why? Because they looked at the market and they said that's what the market is demanding. They just did a very significant deal. They did a deal with I know Monsanto, I'm trying to remember the Israeli company, Ormat. They did a deal with Ormat with respect to the biofuels. They did a huge deal with Monsanto just now. And that's one way. How does Evogene negotiate with Monsanto? A small company against giant company. Because Monsanto is undoubtedly scared that Evogene is going to do a deal with Pioneer, another giant. If you create a competition, or if you create the appearance of competition, which involves an element of dishonesty occasionally, if you make them think that they are in an auction, and that if they don't get it, their competitor is going to get it, you sort of put a giant in your corner. So you can help by examining the market. I'll skip that. In a bargaining power, if you are a seller, there is a curve which is definable, and any professional will describe it to you. The seller's power is strongest immediately before you sign a letter of intent. You have management presentations. Everybody wants to take you to the dance. You are very attractive. You have a great technology. You have good management. They've seen nothing but what you've wanted to show them, and your stock goes up to here. At that point, you sign a letter of intent granting one party exclusivity, like that. And the reason is, you know, you've taken yourself off the market and you have granted exclusivity to one party who is now going to look through your underwear hoping to find bad things that will lower the price. No? Doesn't agree. We're going to have a heated discussion later. If you are the buyer, if you are the seller, you want to create as much competition or the appearance of competition as possible. If you are the buyer, you want to get to a letter of intent that gives you exclusivity for as long as possible while you look at the company. If you're the seller, because the letter of intent is going to grant exclusivity, you want it to be detailed as possible. You want it to have a price. You want the due diligence to go very quickly. You want to have benchmarks for when you get a draft of the contract, when they finish due diligence. You want very few open doors for the buyer to walk away. If you're the buyer, you have exclusive now, you're in there, you're doing due diligence, you want as much time as possible, and you want as much flexibility as possible. One strategy that I've used in the past is give the buyer exclusivity for a period of 90 days, provided that either party can terminate without liability if the buyer hasn't delivered a draft of a purchase contract within X days. Keep them moving towards the goal. If the buyer ever proposes a lower purchase price, exclusivity terminates. Keep them where they originally were when you first chose them. If you fail to execute a definitive agreement within X days, exclusivity terminates. You want the process to move, and you want to level the playing field. Makes the buyer keep his promises. Let's talk about conditions to closing. Here's what the buyer is going to want. I will buy your company subject to satisfactory due diligence. That is, if after I kick the tires, I still want it. What you want is, or the entrepreneur wants, is you must close if my earnings are what I told you they were, or unless there's a material adverse change. The buyer is going to want, I'll close subject to financing. There may not be any financing anymore, but what you want is a commitment letter or a letter from a bank that says it's confident that the financing is there, or a buyer that has the financing. Buyer is going to propose subject to board approval. You never agree to that. Their board can approve, their board can disapprove. You want to make sure that they're able to do the deal up front. Material adverse change, and maybe Philip's going to talk about that later, but what is a material adverse change? Is it the market going down 500 points and Lehman and Merrill going out of business? Not if you negotiate properly. Material adverse change is something bad that happens to your company, not that happens to general economic conditions. I didn't know how long this was going to take. The other thing that Ella raised is confidentiality. Let's be clear. Once you have shown something to someone, they know it. So the issue is whether you can keep them from using it, whether you can get the information back, whether you can keep them from soliciting your employees. What I've found, again, as a way to level the playing field, is to open the kimono slowly, to provide the information that they need to go forward to make a meaningful decision, but to preserve really confidential, especially when you're dealing with a strategic buyer or a private equity buyer that has a company, a portfolio company in the same business. Avoid showing them a customer list. You can show them revenues. You avoid showing them pricing, but you may show them margins. There's all kinds of things that you feel comfortable showing them, and some things that you just would rather preserve until the deal has advanced to a very late stage. One very contentious point dealing with private equity companies is attempting to keep them from ganging up against you. The entrepreneur wants to establish an auction atmosphere or some competitive spirit in the marketplace. When they gang up on you and co-venture to make the investment, it hurts the valuation. Finally, really finally. There are people out there actively sourcing acquisitions, and therefore there are opportunities out there. And one of the important things is how to get noticed, because there's a lot of noise out there, and there are a lot of ideas out there, and there are obvious ways and less obvious ways. Industry groups, trade shows, professionals, VCs, networks. I know this is self-serving, but I'm going to say it anyway. You really need to understand the value of having the right team. The giant does not want to go outside its comfort zone. So if your accountant is your brother-in-law from Afula, and your law firm is your sister-in-law from Hadera, it's not that they're going to assume that their big shot law firm is going to beat up your lawyer. They're going to assume that it's going to be very hard to get a deal done, because people are going to be arguing about things they shouldn't be arguing about. When we entered the market in Israel, we had no way of finding which companies had credibility that would allow us to introduce them to our clients. So we simply went to the best law firms in Israel and said, which of your clients would you recommend for introductions? And immediately those clients had credibility by association with quality firms. If anyone wants to hear the rest of my speech, and I don't recommend it, see me later. Maybe the ending. And I end where I began, which is always good. Always, always, always put yourself in the position of the person across the table. What are their concerns, their fears, their goals? If you understand them, you can address them. Am I back on time? Here we go.
Thank you very much, yeah. Thank you for all this wonderful advice. Martin Gerstel, who's a member of the board, the founder of AZA and the chairman of Itamar Medical and Compigen, once gave a very interesting talk here about negotiations. And he told about, actually everybody's standing up. You can take the seats. We have plenty of seats up front, so make yourself comfortable. He told us about a case. He told us about a case in which he was negotiating on behalf of AZA with a client, and he was sure this is going to be a win-win situation for everybody. For some reason, the negotiation wasn't moving forward. And what he discovered eventually, what he realized eventually was that they were afraid that somebody else would get the product under better terms. And he promised them that nobody will ever get the product at a better price, and then the deal was sold. So putting yourself in the place of the negotiation partner is extremely important. Another story about we went to about funny questions. We went to see a show, and a children's show, and the actors were actually there, and they invited the children to ask questions. And after we left the show, my 8-year-old said, well, I actually did want to ask a question, but I was too embarrassed. I said, well, Oren, what did you want to ask? I wanted to ask the actor where he got his boots. Okay. So we're now moving to the next lecture, and this is the giant IBM. Dr. Miki Rodeh joined IBM in 1976 after completing his PhD in computer science at the Technion. He managed the IBM Israel R&D labs, which now employs more than 1,000 people. Recently, Miki joined IBM Corporate Development, which was involved in the acquisition of XIV and Diligent in Israel. Miki.
So I'm definitely not an expert in negotiations. I've seen a couple of examples recently. So I thought maybe what I'll try to do is provide some background of why IBM does it and what is IBM looking for. So is that better? Okay, so I thought I'll share with you some views of what IBM is saying about acquisitions, and maybe some observations that based on the little I've seen.
which can give, maybe ideas on how to approach it. The reason for this picture is, that this bird was selected as the national bird recently, and I like birds. So, as I said, everything will be like personal notes as opposed to, company official position. So I'll try to cover 4 things. One is why IBM is acquiring companies. What do we do in Israel? Some commitments as part of the negotiations. How do I view negotiations, and so on. And the information that you'll see here is all publicly available. It's not something which is confidential. I think it's quite surprising that IBM is actually showing this. So maybe let me kind of use a foil by the IBM CEO, in which he gives a prediction for what the company intends to do in the next couple of years. This is talking about earning per share. And if you look at it, you see that in 2006 this was like $6.06, going to 7.18. And then he says, we plan to grow the earning per share to $10 to $11 by year 2010. And at the bottom you see how you get into this commitment. So, you start with the historical revenue growth, and then you add elements to it. So one is margin expansion. You see the share repurchase. You see growth initiatives. Future acquisitions, which is the focus of what I'm trying to say. And then there are some other financial sources which are outside of the scope of this discussion. That's the extra dollar there, if you wish, between $10 and $11. So IBM is very explicit on this statement and never made such statements before. This is the first time we did that. If you then look at the breakdown, how do you get to this $11 or $10 on the right, and you do the same calculation again, but this time show the elements or the contributions, then from left to right, you see there again, the historic revenue growth that I mentioned. IBM grew 3% organically. Then margin expansion, which again, the way we do it is you divest from lower margin areas and you get into areas with higher margins. Share purchases, which is something that's returning value to the shareholders. And in this way you get to $9. And then you look into the growth initiatives and future acquisitions, and basically acquisitions should show up in terms of revenue growth at the level of 1 to 3%. You can say 2%, let's say. Now the company is like $100 billion company. So it says, every year we have to show growth from acquisitions at the level of $2 billion. Sometimes less, sometimes more. Meaning, can't be very small acquisitions, right? So I think it's important to put this in perspective to understand what IBM is trying to do, and then look at it from the Israeli perspective. So that's so let's focus on that. By the way, growth initiatives is all kinds of things, including deeper penetration into the emerging economies, which is a lot of where the growth is coming from, actually. Excuse me?
Up until this week.
Yeah, even more so. So let's now focus only on acquisitions, right? I mean, if you remember, these different contributions. So talking about acquisitions. So again, looking at on the left, you see the same number, starting with $6.06. And you see the different contributions, and I'm now focusing on acquisitions. Now, if you look at the bottom middle you see the little bar chart which talks about estimated acquisition revenue growth. So since we have done quite a few acquisitions, we can draw some statistics. So for the sake of these statistics, exclude all the acquisitions that were above $1 billion. And then you look at the growth of the revenue year 1 after acquisition, year 2 after acquisition, and so on. So you see that year 1, you get 24% revenue growth relative to what the same company did before the acquisition. So 24%. The second year grows 38%. So, and then there is year 3 and 4 and 5. You see 24, 22, 20. If you reverse this observation, you can say, which are the companies which are interesting? So you would say, these are companies, first of all, that are of reasonable size, and second, by applying the IBM sales engine, if you wish, and synergy with other products, and so on, you should get significant growth in revenue year 1 and 2, and then following years. So if you look in the middle again, at the top, you see that IBM did in 2007, it did 17 acquisitions at the level of $6 billion. And then there is a bullet there saying, we closed the acquisition of Cognos. Cognos is kind of very unique because it's like a $5 billion acquisition. So there was one deal like that. But the point is that there are not so many acquisitions. I mean, during this period there were 17. So, it cannot be that all of them are small, right? And then there is also PTI margins. I will not talk about that, on the right. So if you now put IBM aside and you look a little bit on the literature, there is a piece of work that was published recently called Granularity of Growth. And I think it's important because it gives you a feel of how large companies think. And again, this is not a piece of work by IBM. And so maybe the most important observation is the first one. First observation says the company whose revenue increases more slowly than GDP is 5 times more likely to disappear in the next economic cycle. So there is no option but growth, which ties back to what I said before. If there is no option but growth, then the importance of acquisitions is high and will continue to be high. So it's not that IBM is in the business of acquisitions just for this year or for last year. It will be in this business for many years to come. So I think that observation is kind of interesting. It's also interesting that what matters, or what can explain 80% of growth differences between companies are 2 factors. One is the revenue that the company is getting through its M&A activity. So the growth in M&A activity, that's the third bullet, the growth in M&A activity that is achieved through M&A activity, plus the growth that is achieved by selecting high growth market segments. These explain most of the growth that the companies see. So it must pick growth areas, and it must do acquisitions. The combination of these two explains 80% of the growth. So that's the reason IBM is obviously focusing on these two, if you want to look at it that way. And then the other question is, okay, so do you pick very large segments, multi-billion-dollar segments? Can you analyze the performance of the different products and different what we call brands? in a coarse way, or should you go fine grain? And the answer is, according to this paper, says that you have to look at, if you wish, categories within sub-industries. So if you have an industry, and then you partition it into sub-industries, and then you partition it again into categories, this is the level in which you should understand it. And at the bottom you can see, translating this into numbers, the unit which you should assess your performance is like $50 to $200 million, and not in very coarse terms. So, and the point is, worldwide there are millions of such segments, such opportunities. So if I want to wrap up what I've said until now, acquisitions are critical. There will be some very large acquisitions, but they are not interesting for the sake of this discussion. Most of them will be average size, 50 million to 200, maybe 500 million. Not zero, because not very small revenue figures, because this will not contribute enough to the $2 billion that the company has to bring in through acquisitions every year. So there will be dozens of these, medium size each. Now that's not me saying, that's what this paper is saying, but it just relates very closely to what I said about IBM. So now let's talk about Israel. Now IBM doesn't have any program to acquire companies in Israel. Actually doesn't have any program to acquire companies anywhere in the world. It's not managed by geography. It is managed by value in a global manner. Still, if you look at our history, you see the timeline there with the red dots where acquisitions were done. You see that the first one was done in 98. In 08, meaning this year, we acquired 3. Actually, XIV was acquired the last day of 07. So depending how you want to actually count it. And here you see a mixture of two phenomena. One is companies like Ubiq, Unicorn, XIV, Diligent, FilesX. These are Israeli companies. Maybe they are registered elsewhere, but they are indeed here in Israel. If you look at companies like iPhrase, Watchfire, and Telelogic, these were actually foreign companies, foreign from the Israeli perspective. So for example, the most recent is Telelogic, which is a Swedish company that like 2 years before acquired by IBM, they acquired an Israeli company called iLogix, which is located in the Weizmann Institute. So in the industrial park to the north of the Weizmann Institute. So the point is, sometimes acquisitions happen actually of Israeli companies, and sometimes these are inherited by acquiring a larger company that before that acquired an Israeli companies. So, but the net is, there was no program to acquire companies in Israel. So, still you can look at it, 8 companies is good enough a selection. So you can say, what happened to these? And it's interesting that all of them are still located in Israel. Some are very new, so it's, time will tell. But as far as I can judge today, all of them grew. Some of them grew significantly. No technology was taken out of the country. There was not even a single case out of these 8 in which technologies were taken out. And the reason is people. I mean, it's not just, you don't buy the companies, you buy in some cases you buy the business, but in many of these cases, these are actually some of the smaller companies in terms of revenue, with the exception of Telelogic maybe, also a little bit Watchfire, but again, these were not Israeli companies. So in these cases, these were smaller in terms of revenue for IBM, but what was critical is people. So if I combine these two trends, I will say first of all, in practice, there are quite many acquisitions that IBM does in Israel, and second, that IBM respects the technology that is being developed here and the businesses, and is keeping them here and nurturing them here. So that's... Excuse me?
Can you talk about the purchase cost?
No, I can't talk about them. If these are not public companies, then IBM doesn't publish it. So now let's go to the third section of the talk, which is, so what? Now you have the data, right? Why IBM acquires, what it does in Israel, and so on, and putting this now a little bit in perspective, and this is now my personal views. First of all, IBM has close to 100,000 partners. And I told you it acquired last year, 17 companies. So let's say it acquires less than 20. There was no year in which it acquired more than 20. So we should think of working with many partners, acquiring a few. That's kind of to understand that. So from my perspective now, maybe a word on my job. So I report to corporate development in Armonk, but I'm located here in Israel, and I'm trying to encourage acquisition of Israeli companies if there is real value, and to help ensure that the integration of the acquired companies is done well. So looking on it from that perspective, there will be a small number of acquisitions in Israel in the future, if you can predict based on what we have done until now. We do work with, say, 200 companies here in Israel. I mean, IBM does. And we do talk to like 800, and we know like 2,000. So acquisitions cannot be the only value that the local industry creates with IBM. And IBM cannot be satisfied by the value that it creates through acquisitions. So think of it like a pyramid. It's a very broad-based pyramid with thousands of companies. The bottom, very few make it into the acquisition phase. So I think that critical is to create value for everybody in this collaboration, and acquisitions is just one. Second is, a relationship should be built well before the acquisitions, because it gives IBM or IBM executives much higher level of confidence when they are going to buy a company that they already know. So my recommendation is the relations do not start at negotiation phase. They start well earlier. The second major bullet says you acquire one company, it has influence on other companies, on the acquisition of other companies. If the first one is successful, there is higher tendency to acquire another one. If there is a failure, it may negatively impact the interest in acquiring other Israeli companies. Now, this is probably not the case in the US, but what I hear my partners talking about, I hear them talking about, they think of Israel as an entity. And we are actually using it as an advantage. But we have to be very careful, because reputation is something you can build or ruin, depending on the results. Next point is, IBM is a portfolio company. It's not very focused on one technology. And it keeps changing. It regenerates itself every few years. Now, more than half of it is services. 10 years ago, it was negligible portion was services. So the company is changing, and it's divesting from areas and getting into new areas and so on. So the strategy today may not be the strategy tomorrow. And therefore, I think it's important to figure out, which direction can the company go, anticipate that, talk to or keep in touch with IBM, and find the right point in time in which the stars are aligning for you. And if the stars are not aligning for you today, doesn't mean that they will not align for you tomorrow. And the case of XIV, for example, took me a year and a half just to introduce the company to IBM because there was no interest. And then at one point we were able to convince IBM that this should be a technology of interest, and it's in a maturing market, it's emerging, but it is for real, and therefore the interest built up. So maybe the last point here is there are two paradigms at work in IBM. One is gap fillers. There is a general manager in charge of an area. He needs something that he doesn't have. He identifies it. Then his people will search the world for the best company to fill in that gap. There is another way, which is, here is IBM's strategy. What is kind of adjacent to the strategy but not included in it? Is there an Israeli company that can fit that adjacent market very well? And if that company is a worldwide leader in technology or maybe even market, then there is an opportunity. So, can I get 1 minute to put it together? No? Okay. So putting it together. So acquisitions are important for IBM. I think when you get to negotiations, discipline management is critical. I've seen, companies that could not come to the discussion, to the negotiation table in an orderly fashion, and they lost. So I think you have to show good management practices inside your firm. Readiness for easy integration. Actually, when you think corporate development is about acquisition, it's not so true. The reality is corporate development in IBM is more about integration. Because acquiring companies is one thing, and integrating them well is another. And corporate development is measured on the success of the integration, of the post-acquisition activities. So companies which are more ready for integration will get higher grade. And I think it's very important to understand that. By the way, the people that do the deals follow up for another 2 years after the deal is closed to see that their judgment was correct. And they are measured that way. As I said, medium-sized acquisitions are most effective. It means that it can take time to build such companies. You have to show quite nice revenue before you become a natural candidate for acquisition. Although, as I said, if there is a technology gap, then maybe you can do it earlier. Richness of product lines. I say it's not necessarily an advantage. This was a surprising finding for me, because I saw two companies which had a combination of two products. And one general manager in IBM could have been interested in just one of those, and the other general manager could be interested in the other, but their objectives are not necessarily aligned. And it was impossible to convince them to get simultaneously a decision that they will acquire the asset and then split it in some way. It was so much more difficult that it's not necessarily an advantage. Loss of trust. I've seen deals which didn't come through because during the negotiation there was loss of trust. And in IBM this is critical. There is another consideration, put it as a sub-bullet, less important in my mind, but it is still dominant in IBM thinking, which is the cultural differences. If the feeling is it will be very difficult to integrate, maybe don't do it. Then the last point is about new business models. So everybody recognizes that new business models are important and so on and so forth when it comes to practice. Very few executives in IBM will have the leap of faith to get into a new business model that they are not convinced that will work. So if you want to have that, and people will be open to have that discussion, but you'll better have good proofs. Okay?
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you.
Vicky, could you take a seat here? We'll take questions. We have a panel, so we'll take questions in a few minutes. Please remember your question. And I'm going to ask Ed to give his talk. Thank you, Mickey. Thank you for an excellent talk. It's amazing to see acquisitions being take place with huge companies, with small companies for different reasons. And we'll hear more about acquisitions in the second half of the program. Okay. Yes. There we go. Ed. Any button. This one is extremely easy to use.
Completely different kind of negotiation. How do you deal with us guys? How do you deal with VCs? Can't hear me? You're lucky. How do you deal with VCs? And I use the word seriously. Actually, the word I wanted to use was meaningfully, but I wasn't sure if that's as in common use amongst non-first language English speakers. What can you meaningfully negotiate with a VC? I mean, in principle, you think you can negotiate everything, but as a practical matter, I think you're a lot better off to understand, from our point of view, who you're dealing with. I mean, a number of speakers have referred to this. You better understand what's in the mind of the person that you're trying to convince about something, in just the same way that we on our side have to understand what you want and who you are. So I'll just intersperse one comment that I strongly recommend any entrepreneur who goes to any VC to do his homework very thoroughly. It's very common in our business for a VC to do, quotes, due diligence on the business plan, on the company, on the individuals, and so on and so forth. But believe me, it's just as important for the entrepreneur to do his due diligence on the VC. Because I'll jump ahead a bit. If you marry the wrong person, I mean in the normal heterosexual sense of the word, not convenient, a bit of a problem, but you can get a divorce. It's a hell of a lot more difficult to divorce yourself from an investor than it is from a spouse. So you better do at least as much thinking about it. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to go through a phase of sort of living together before you sign the documents in the VC situation than it is in the thing between people. Okay, I don't know if you can see the bottom line, but what I've just tried to do in a very simplistic fashion, try and tell you, what are you going to hear from the VC after you've attracted his interest to the point where he essentially wants to do a deal? Now here again, I'm going to intersperse a little bit of a caution. There are some people in this business who will not issue a term sheet. A term sheet is simply a memorandum of what you hope to see dealt with before you come to a final agreement. What are the elements that you're going to be talking about? Some people in our business do not submit a term sheet to an entrepreneur or a company until they're convinced that they really want to do the deal. And it's a question of, can they come to the right terms? Unfortunately, there are quite a few people in our industry who throw around term sheets like Rosh Hashanah greetings cards. I mean, you know, the people you've forgotten long since what they look like. So be very careful when you do your due diligence as an entrepreneur. Find out from other people who've done deals with that VC, did they throw a term sheet at you and then not go through with it? I'm not going to name names, but I tell you, I think, am I right, Drew? I don't think we've ever In the history of Gemini, really 15 years, maybe there was one, where we submitted a term sheet and then didn't go through with the deal after the basic terms were agreed upon. And that was because something, I mean a skeleton, there was a closet full of skeletons, not just one thing rattling around, there were just too many things you couldn't ignore. Okay, what's the basic thing? How much for how much? How much for how much? We say your company is worth X bucks, and we're going to put in Y bucks, and that buys a certain percentage of the company, Y over X plus Y times 100. You can argue about that. Of course you can argue about that. That's negotiable. That's negotiable. If a VC simply refuses to negotiate, they shouldn't, unless the thing is totally outrageous, in which case you turn it down. But basically speaking, that is negotiable. More the for how much than the how much. So for example, you look at the first bullet, how much from the lead investor? The person who submits the term sheet is the lead investor. He is not necessarily, in fact not often, the only investor in the deal. But he essentially takes responsibility for getting the other investors into the deal, and he knows how much he's willing to put in, and typically that's not very negotiable. So I made it a kind of an end stroke question mark. If we think we want to put $3 million in a deal, don't expect us to change that to 1 million or to 6 million. I mean, we may change it to 2.5 or to 3.5, but we're not going to change it very much. ESOP, what is the ESOP? The ESOP is the employee stock option plan. Extremely critical element of the capitalization table after the deal. How much is set aside for issue as stock options to employees? How much has already been issued to existing employees, including sometimes the founders themselves? This is a biggish number. This can be a big number in an early stage company. So the question is, who suffers the dilution from this plan? Let's say you're going to set aside 20% of new employee stock option, 20% of the company for new stock. If you do this before the deal, you set aside the amount, then it comes out of the hide of the founders and the people who owned the company originally. If you do it after the deal, it partially comes out of the hide of the people who also invested. So you can tell they're not going to like that, and you're not going to like the former thing. So this is something that's very definitely negotiable. How much of the employee stock option plan how big should it be, and how much of it should be done before you close the deal, and how much should be done after the deal? How much do the new investors share in the dilution? Yes, you can negotiate it, but don't expect a lot of joy from the efforts you spent on this. Types of shares. We guys who seldom, I mean, there were some funny questions floating around on bits of paper prior to this. VCs very seldom, an individual VC extremely seldom owns a majority of the company. I mean, very, very seldom. So if he's a minority shareholder, so what he wants is something called preferred shares. Now, you've got enough lawyers in this room to explain what that is, but that means, without even knowing exactly what it means, you can be pretty damn sure that a preferred share is worth more than a common share because it has preferences. It has, for example, typically, it accrues, the company doesn't pay it, but it accrues on paper an 8% per year dividend. You can negotiate whether that's compound interest or simple interest. Really, it's usually simple interest. The preferred terms you can, what is the major element of a preference? A major element of a preference is that if the company is sold, I might say just to talk about IPOs when we used to have them. There used to be things called IPOs. There used to be something called NASDAQ, but I think it went down the drain with Lehman Brothers. But anyway, the typical exit for a company is the companies are going to get sold. If it were an IPO, all the preferred shares convert to common shares, so there's only one class of shares, so the preferences tend to disappear. If the company is sold, the preferred shares expect to get their money out first, plus whatever dividends they've accrued. Now, they also expect some other stuff, like they take their money out, and then what do you do with the rest of the money? Do the common shareholders take theirs out, and then what's left is divided pro rata between the two? Or do the preferred shareholders get their percentage also of the money after they've taken their first money out? The latter is called participating preferred, and is something that's more advantageous to the investor than it is to the company, to the previous owners of the company. This you can argue about, definitely. This is a totally negotiable item. And the other thing that's negotiable, that even though the preferred shares take their money out first, and they have dividends and all this stuff, they will accept a cap, a limit, on the total value of their preferences. And you can talk about that limit. How do you know what to talk about? You can ask your lawyer what's typical. You can ask your friends who've also done deals what sort of deals they made. This is not highly secret information that's very difficult to obtain, but it's important for you to understand that this is something you can negotiate. Whoops, that couldn't have been the right button, could it? I thought you said any button. Let's go away. Oh. Come on, IBM, you're computer guys. No, never mind. That was much better looking than you. Sorry. How do I get to the next slide?
Okay, next.
What was that? Okay. Just the left-hand button? Just the left-hand?
Yeah.
Okay. Boilerplate. When I first wrote this, I thought everybody knew what boilerplate was, but I'm told it's not. It's not usually not everybody is familiar with the word boilerplate. Boilerplate is used as a phrase to describe in any kind of a contract the kind of stuff that are standard provisions which most people don't even bother to read, sometimes at their peril. But anyway, the boilerplate, for example, the kind of things that apply in a term sheet, and the term sheet may be only 4 pages, remember, it's not a huge agreement. If the company does go public, the preferred shareholders want to have registration rights for their stock, and they want the company to bear the expense of that registration. You're not going to be able to negotiate them out of that, because that's become essentially boilerplate, hasn't it, Gary? I mean,
Registration rights?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a sort of boilerplate. So don't waste your energy and your skills and all the wonderful things you've learned today about negotiating. Don't waste them on things which is a waste of time to things. Vetoes, registration rights, business rights. What sort of vetoes? These sound terrible, but if you think about them, preferred shareholders very seldom own a majority of the company, even if there are several of them. So they want a veto against the company changing its business. They want a veto against the company selling itself without the permission of the preferred shareholders. You're not going to be able to talk your new investors out of those things, so forget about it. Don't waste your time on it. This one, you'll love this one, but it's going to be in there whether you love it or hate it, the no shop clause. In the term sheet, there's a little thing at the bottom that if you're crazy enough to sign this damn term sheet, one of the things you've agreed to is that for X days, 30, 60, 90, you will not go and talk to anybody else about this deal. Now, this is life. Now, it sounds unreasonable, but it really isn't, because the VC is going to spend, I mean, he can attest to this. We spend a hell of a lot of time analyzing the company, analyzing the market, analyzing the competition, analyzing this, that, the other thing, and so on and so forth. So the last thing we want to know is, a week after we signed the term sheet, the guys went off and did a deal with somebody else. So the VC is going to want a no-shop clause, and he's not going to settle for the absence of a no-shop clause. What you can negotiate is how long does that thing last. And even though I'm supposed to be representing the VC, really my heart's more with the entrepreneur. Don't let them make it more than 30 days. Don't let them make it more than 30 days. Because the company you're running, usually a company is raising money because it doesn't have any. It's raising money because it's maybe not even paying the founders' salaries. What you can't afford to do is to go into an open-ended process that you don't know how the hell long it's going to take to come to completion. So the duration of the no-shop clause is very definitely something that you could and should negotiate, unless it's 30 days, in which case you say, boy, I picked a good VC to go to. You'll never get them to take it for less than that. Okay? Yes, that worked. This is very interesting. The founders have certain shares or receive certain shares, and the question is, how much do they actually own all at once? Vesting of an option, vesting is when it becomes yours and yours alone. It's yours to exercise or not exercise. This is negotiable. This is negotiable. It depends on the circumstances of the company. It depends how much money, believe it or not, the founders were crazy enough to put into the company. It depends on how many times people like her crazy husband worked without a salary. So, you know, it is negotiable. But typical is that 30% of whatever the founder has vests immediately, and the rest invests over 3 or 4 years. Why? Because as a number of people have mentioned, what the investor, whether it's somebody buying your company or somebody investing in your company, wants to ensure that the key people have an incentive to stay. And that's really what options are all about. Now, there's a new one that's come up lately. Can the founders sell their shares? Well, I can tell you this much. They will not be able to do it without the permission of the board. And you can argue yourself blue in the face, and then no potential investor, no VC investor is going to accept a difference from that. But there is a modern trend which I like very much from the point of view of the entrepreneur and the founders, that they have an opportunity now which they never used to have in previous years. I don't know, Ram, if you can remember how long back this happened, but in order to keep, look, somebody is an entrepreneur. What do they work? They don't work 9 to 5. They work like 20 hours a day, give or take a half an hour off, go to the bathroom. They work 6.5 days a week unless they've got to keep up, in which case they're restricted to 6. So you're a tough case. They work very hard. They do this for 3 or 4 years. I even say sometimes that, you know, they're away from home so much, on an airplane so much, that one day they get home and they find a child they didn't even know they had, you know, and have to be introduced to them. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but they really live a very tough life. So if there is an opportunity for them to cash in some of the money, some of their shares, VCs these days, in new rounds of financing, will very often agree to take a significant piece of that money and give it to the founders in exchange for their shares. They get diluted, but they get paid for getting diluted. Why doing this? The guy who gets the money feels a hell of a lot better. I mean, if he can put away $1 million after 3 years, and he's worked very hard for 3 years, they say, hey, that's not such a bad deal. The other thing is that it reduces the temptation of the founders to accept fairly low offers from potential acquirers. Now, sitting in Israel, I don't think we can include IBM amongst the vultures that sit on the wall trying to do acquisitions, but there are other companies, and since, you can see me like Cisco, there's EMC, there's SAP, there's CA, there's Micro something, what the hell are they called? Anyway, Microsoft, there are all kinds of companies around who are watching the Israeli scene very, very carefully. And they're going to acquire companies at the earliest time that's convenient for them if they can persuade the company to sell. We've had, even before this provision came in, and we wish like hell in retrospect we'd been able to do this, we've seen a company being offered 40, 50 million bucks, and the founders start doing the arithmetic. They know the company's potentially worth a hell of a lot more than that. They know they could raise more money and wait a couple of years and it would double in value, triple in value, quadruple in value. But boy, there's this check floating around. And the wife has been saying, I want a new kitchen, sort of. We'd like to feed the kids more than once a week, so let's get some money. So these offers of acquisition, of buying a company, a relatively early stage, they're there. And especially since the IPO market went to hell, this is very tempting. So entrepreneurs are going to be subjected to this temptation to sell out too soon. Now, I know that the VCs are the ones who are accused of wanting to sell out too soon because they want to show returns quickly, and that can be true. If a VC, one of the VCs in the syndicate, is raising a new fund, he'd like to have an exit that he can show his potential investors. Okay. What have I got? 2 minutes? 3 minutes? 2 minutes. The board. The board. This is a very important thing. I mean, I've been in boards. Some of them would barely. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but they barely fit in this room. I mean, there's everybody who ever said hello to the company or invested $2 in the company or was around at some point is on the board. What contribution do they make? Absolutely none. But what is the board? What is the effective of the board? Identically zero. They're bloody useless. What's the best kind of a board if you're starting a company? 5 people. Never more than 7. 5 people. 5 is the best number. The CEO, one of the founders, or it can be 2 of the founders if the CEO was also a founder, 2 of the investors, and 1 outside industry expert who only has, if he's good, only has the interests of the company at heart and not of his own pocket. And unfortunately, it's necessary to remind the investors who are on the board that as directors, their primary responsibility is not to themselves as investors, but to the company as a company. And a board member should be willing to do things which are bad for his own position if they're good for the company. Otherwise, there were more such people, but there are some such people. Last slide. All this gets watched out. What does this mean? If you're a successful repeat entrepreneur, you have enormous negotiating powers. You don't need to sign the bloody term sheet if you don't like what they're offering you, because there are probably people queuing up to get in on your next deal. And a not untypical conversation is, yes, we want to invest in you, and by the way, what do you plan to do? Because if you look at the record of successful repeat entrepreneurs, the likelihood they'll be successful again is high. It's not 100% because they sometimes pick the wrong thing to do. But it's very high because they know what to do, they know the rules of the game, they've made their mistakes, and I'm saying if they've been successful, they've obviously either corrected their mistakes or made less than they might have made. For first-timers, the whole of the previous things that I've said apply because they're unproven and nobody knows what the hell they're going to actually be like once you give them the money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. We'll now start the panel, but first I'd like to introduce a newcomer to the stage, Philip Ulmer, partner in the real estate group of Oswong. Philip specializes in complicated commercial property development projects and high-value investment property acquisitions across the country. He acts for a number of public and private UK property companies, institutional city funds, and numerous overseas investors. Philip is a well-known practitioner in the industry and regularly lectures to the property industry on relevant legal issues. And what we really want to hear is a little bit about financials. So if you could give us a few words. Thank you.
It's a bit of a moving piece, financials. What I was going to say...
If you want to be on the recording, you have this big one over there.
Yeah, that's okay.
Is it okay? Yeah, okay.
The financials, as you all know, are a bit of a moving feast this afternoon and have been for the last 3 days. And in fact, what I was going to say on Friday are not very relevant to what I have to say today. I've been listening to all the speakers with some interest. I've, at my current firm, Oldtime Previously, been acting for Israelis since about 1994. And they're tough views, it has to be said. And they come across as very hard-nosed and very direct, and they bang the table and they say what they want. And some of you will have heard of the famous American Jewish comedian Jackie Mason. And he says that he thinks Israelis come across as the toughest Jews in the world, so tough that he thought they're Puerto Rican. But I think being tough is not the be-all and end-all. And I think Gary's right. You have to get your market research right, and you have to behave in a mature manner, not suggesting that you don't, but you have to have your everything in the right order. I want to say a bit more about financing. The negotiations are going to be much more easier than transactions. You have your financing or banking relationship or commitment capital in your back pocket. And particularly in this market, things have changed dramatically. We were previously looking at deals where leverage was 100%, sometimes even more. As of last week, we were looking at still getting leverage on deals in the London market of around 80%, right, we had a track record in a good market. I really wouldn't like to hazard a guess of where we are on leverage on deals this week or in the next few months. What I do know is I looked at my Blackboard before we started, and the New York LIBOR 3-month rate shot up from 3.1 to 6.4%. And the London 3-month sterling bank rate was shot up from 5.1 to 6.8. So financing is going to be key and key to what you can take out or what you can get from the industry. As to who are the giants, well, clearly yesterday's giants, I suppose, minnows and been swallowed up by other giants. But there are some things I think you can do when you're looking at your investments or works or whatever. And on the assumption that you're going to be suffering from a lower leverage, maybe 60-70% loan to value, there are some things that you can do. And the first thing you should really set about doing is preparing some serious valuations and appraisals on your target or your company you're wanting to deal with. Some serious presentations, spreadsheets, Excel presentations would help. And coming on from that, business plans going forward, at least 2 years, something like that. A point on negotiation, I think Ed said at the beginning something, if you can just take 2 or 3 things away from this evening, that would be great. I once learned The most important adage in any negotiation from one of my particularly well-known London Jewish entrepreneurial clients. And he would shout and scream and he would say, I don't negotiate with myself. And it's a great phrase to remember in any meetings. If somebody sits there stonewalling you quietly opposite, don't start negotiating with yourself. If you get a response to a proposal on financing that you just get stonewall, don't start negotiating with yourself and saying, well, what about this, what about that. Let the negotiations take time, don't rush, be patient. If necessary, be prepared to leave the meeting, walk away. Come back a few hours, a few days later, start again. But don't negotiate.
Thank you, Philip.
I have a list of intellectually brilliant and well thought out questions that I'm not going to ask because we're out of time. Instead, we're going to let you people out there ask some questions, and he's been waiting a long time. Please address it to someone on the panel, and if say it loud and clear, and please repeat the question because no one's going to hear him.
The question is to you talked mainly about, only about acquisitions in which IBM acquired companies. What about, for example, cases of acquiring patents? Has there been cases where, let's say I go to IBM and say I have this and this strategic patent which you might need, or which holds Microsoft by the board, which is part of the president, and I can sell the patent to IBM, for example?
You don't have to repeat the entire question. Did everybody hear that? The question was, we've spoken about acquisitions of the entire company. Would a company like IBM consider simply licensing a product or buying a patent in order to fill its product line or exploit the patent?
So I've not seen a case like that. IBM has the largest number of patents, and usually the deals about patents are kind of between big companies. So IBM and HP, I think, have an agreement in which, here is all my patents, here are all your patents. Let's compare who has more value, and there is money changing hands if one side agrees that the other side is strong. So there is a lot of that. IBM also sells patents. To be honest, I have not seen a case in which IBM buys patents.
How do you explain?
Because it has very strong hand. It invests a lot of money, that's why it makes the largest number of patents in the world. Portfolio of 30,000 patents.
IBM is not unique in that. In many cases, many companies have biases against things that are not invented in-house. They feel more comfortable, and it's simply a perspective that's worked fairly well for IBM. Question?
Nothing right from the question. Question to Dr. Malak. Sometimes the VC who is investing in seed in a startup will ask for an option for the next round to invest a certain amount for a certain percentage. Now, if it will do it, it's okay, but if it will not, most probably the startup will not be able to raise any other money. Now, is it okay to grant such an option?
This is a very tough question for the person who's being asked to grant it. But we do a great number, I think probably more than any other VC in Israel, of what we call seed deals. And these are all based upon exactly the situation you're talking about. We'll put in X bucks, where X is very seldom as much as $1 million, but it is occasionally $1 million. And based on the scoreboard, that after 6 months or 3 months or whatever it takes, you get to a certain scoreboard. And we say, if you get all the ticks in the scoreboard, we will then invest $3 million and we discuss the terms and conditions. But if there's going to be a bigger round, we will bring in another $3 million from the reputable VC, and so on and so forth. If we do not do that, where does that leave you? Right, that's what you're saying. In the first place, it leaves you short of your scoreboard, which means you didn't do nearly as well with the money that you got in the seed deal as you thought you were going to do, or at least you said you were going to do. So maybe you should reconsider how good your property is. What we have done is, if people have not reached all of the goals, what we try and do is we say, look, you didn't meet our goal. We're not going to go ahead with this investment. Well, we're going to help you find an investment from people who have different goals, different objectives, different standards, different this, different this. Am I right? Well, we do. So, but if you meet a fair approximation of what we promised you would do, it becomes a firm commitment and not an option. So it's a commitment. If you reach the goals, it's a commitment. If you don't reach the goals,
which is why, again, from an entrepreneur's point of view, you never want to disappoint anyone. You never want to overpromise. You want to have realistic goals that you carefully negotiate and not be so hungry for the first round that you leave yourself in a position like that. Ed is one of the more enlightened venture capitalists in the world. One of my partners who specializes in venture capital says, if you want a friend, buy a dog. They have their own interests. They have fiduciary obligations to their investors. They worship at the shrine of a god called return on investment, ROI, and they're quite consistent in their behavior. What you heard today about the newly enlightened view of allowing entrepreneurs to take some chips off the table because it's in everyone's best interest is an evolving thing. I don't think Ed would have held that view 5 years ago when it was absolute heresy that anyone should ever get any money back before the venture capitalist. They are an extraordinarily important part of the financing scheme, but they have their own interests to protect, and the entrepreneur needs to keep that in mind. Is that fairly stated? Could I ask a question? Because I need some help in my negotiation. I heard you say that when you do an acquisition and you apply the IBM sales engine and synergies with other products, you expect to get a 29% and 38% growth in the first 2 years. That growth would not exist but for the product that the entrepreneur brings and the engine that IBM brings. When you value the company, are you prepared to give them credit for the next 12 months of sales and apply a multiple so that you give them some credit for bringing the product that they could not exploit as well unless you were there?
You know, I cannot tell you about the negotiation because I'm never part of the negotiation itself. I'm kind of bringing companies to the table, and so I cannot comment on that. But I would assume that in the internal evaluation of what the company is worth, you do include this multiplication.
Part of it. Question? No. Let me get some people.
I have an interesting question, Harold. If you know of a multinational corporation that has a patent, it opens a multi-billion-dollar market, and it's not using it, probably because it doesn't know the application, what can you do?
Infringe. No, I haven't said that. Can we erase this tape? That's what everybody else does. It really, you really. If you, the question was, you've sold the patent to the multinational?
No. I wrote the patent and I found out that they have the patent, but they don't use it.
You can attempt to buy it. Again, if you license it to somebody with significant clout, they will infringe it. I mean, there are people infringing patents every second of the day. They do it on a risk-benefit analysis of what the possible costs of damages and prevailing. But again, I mean, if somebody owns a patent and they have prior rights to the patent, either you try to license it or show them the value that you can bring and negotiate with them, or go to somebody who can benefit from that client and seek to partner with them to acquire it. But you are operating at a significant disadvantage if they're first to market with the patent. So it's really more a common sense question than a legal question. I mean, the patent is there, so the question is, how can you create a value for them in allowing you to exploit it? And the way to do that is to make the pie bigger and show them they can benefit by utilizing it. And you need to be careful, because once you show them, they have it. So, I mean, there are ways to negotiate, and there are people who will, notwithstanding conventional wisdom, behave fairly. So, I'm one more, please. Yes. One.
One is to the partnership. OEM will have been giant before into this. Is it added value, not or not at all? And second is VC as part of the company. Does it add to the acquisition or against it? The partner.
What?
This is an advantage to have a good VC as an investor. Not unless they help you
for acquisition.
Not unless they help you in the deal in some way. If they're a silent party and they're just listed on the cap table as Joe Blow Inc. VC, as much. Now, if they're Sequoia or they're Gemini or they're Kleiner Perkins in that order, then if they've actually helped you make the deal, if they've opened doors for you, if they can make sure you're properly represented with the right legal counsel and the right accountants, then they add value to the deal. But only if they participate in some active way which makes sense. Just having them on the nameplate.
Maybe
No. As he said, if Kleiner Perkins has made an investment in you, people will assume that you have something of value. So there clearly is. You do benefit by association with a better class of investor. And I think Ed is being modest. Now, the other thing that a venture capitalist will bring in addition to money is they're on the board, they're bringing value in terms of advice, they are introducing you to potential acquirers, so there is value in addition to the money, and I hate to be saying nice things about VCs, so I'm going to stop.
Maybe two comments. One is, again, I don't have much experience, but a couple of cases I've seen, we use the VC and the side channel to fuel the communication with the entrepreneurs. And they were more mature than the entrepreneurs themselves. So it was between the communication.
That's good point.
And I think this was of value. I would actually speculate that the deal would not have happened without that side channel. That's one point. Regarding OEM, in my mind, the closer you get to companies, to large companies, the higher the level of confidence they have that what you have is for years. And there are multiple ways to do it. OEM is maybe a very good way to convince the potential acquirer that this asset is for years. So my recommendation is yes, to go for OEM.
But be careful in negotiating the contract. I'm serious. Obviously, you need to be careful in negotiating the contract because once you get married to an OEM, who was talking about the divorce, it's not that easy to get a divorce. You're tied to them. You can't go to their competitor necessarily. They have tremendous price leverage. So it's a negotiation. It's what we're talking here. You need to try to level the playing field. We're done. Thank you so much to the panel. Thank you much to the audience. And
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everybody who's on stage. If you registered in advance, you saw the name of Pathable, which is an online community thing, and you have special badges, and you can talk to the people who've registered. Thank you, Pathable, for being such a good sponsor. We'll now break until 6:20, and 6:20 we'll start again. Thank you. Corporate and securities practice chair Israeli practice is a principal shareholder of Greenberg Traurig, a law firm with great international affairs. He began practicing corporate and securities law in 1982. He also co-chairs the firm's Israel practice and is a frequent business visitor to Israel. In addition to representing Israeli companies, Greenberg Traurig's Israel practice group provides assistance to companies through introductions to potential U.S. strategic partners, joint venture opportunities, and other business-to-business contacts. Bob's experience includes representing IVAX Corporation in its multi-billion merger with Teva Pharmaceutical Industries. Currently, Bob is representing various underwriters in public offerings, including public offerings of Israeli companies. Bob, the chair is yours.
Erev Tov. I guess the first rule of negotiation is not to try and negotiate two deals while you're trying to speak at a conference at the same time, which is what I've been trying to do today. I beg to differ with Gary. Gary, I arrived in Israel on Sunday. When I left, Merrill Lynch and Lehman were still around, and when I got here, they were gone. So I think it's my fault, and I'm sorry. Before we go on, Gary mentioned you heard a little bit about Gary, and you heard a little bit about Maytal. Gary is a little modest. Gary is the chair of our corporate department, which is hundreds of lawyers across the world, not across the country, and he's primarily responsible for building that department to what it is today. And Maytal, if you would stand up, so everybody knows who you are. Maytal is the heart and soul of our Israel practice. That's sitting down, not standing up. You can stand. Thank you. Anyway, I don't have any 8-year-olds to tell stories about, so I won't be able to follow in that footstep. I have 4 boys, the youngest being 13. My 18-year-old likes to laugh at me whenever I'm with them and we're working on a deal when they want me to be doing something with them, primarily because sometimes the investment bankers that used to exist like to sometimes name deals by code names. And I think when we were working on the IVAX deal, I think the name was I, or something like that, and we were, I would be in the car, and somebody would call me on the deal, and I would be talking about Ivory and whatever the other one was, and my kids started making fun of all the names I had for all my deals. All of us, the 3 of us, are here usually about 8 to 10 weeks in Israel. Another thing I have, Gary really was the first one who started coming to Israel and asked me to join him when we started what was our Israel initiative. So I have to thank him for that, because, and thank all of you who have helped to build our practice, because really it's been the high point of my career, and it's really turned my practice around to be here in terms of not only accomplishing what we've accomplished, but the feeling of being in the Haaretz. So I think you introduced the panel briefly, but after I speak, you'll hear from Ronnie Ross, who she must be a great negotiator, because she's so happy all the time from the little bit I've gotten to talk to you, and I can no longer claim to be the most attractive person on the panel. Egal Rotem, who are we missing? Okay, Ayala's not here, but Arnon Dinor. So you might get out a little before 8:30 if he doesn't show up. But hopefully he will. They can each tell you a little bit more about themselves. But looking at what they've accomplished, it's no wonder that David slew Goliath. So our job in this panel, in this group, is to discuss negotiations from the entrepreneur's point of view. You've heard a lot of that already, and I think some of what you're here is going to be maybe reinforcing a little bit of what you have heard already. The first key, I guess, is knowing when to negotiate. As an aside, I have a friend who tells me, happy wife, happy life. And so he never negotiates with his wife. I have unfortunately not learned that lesson, but they say a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. So my job is to be a little more general. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some experiences, in particular certain types of examples, maybe some of which will be a little extreme, and try and help a little bit in how to get a good agreement. I think you've heard some of this to some extent, so I'll try to be as non-repetitive as possible. But some of you also weren't here in the beginning. The agenda tells you a little bit more specifically what our other speakers are going to talk about. And the principles about, that we talk about in negotiation really apply to all types of agreements for the most part, M&A, distribution agreements, joint venture, OEM, etc., investments. But before we get to that, the key to any negotiation is being able to get there in the first place. So it's what happens that gets you there. In Israel, a number of, there are individuals or companies or entities that have access or are fortunate enough to know where to go or have the experience in the industry. But so many of the companies that we meet with, and even some of the VCs and the law firms, etc., the question is really, how do I find the right party or the right partner or how do I gain that access? And I think one of the key things for all of you is to realize what you can and what you are able to do on your own and where you need assistance and where you need help, and to find that partner, whether it be a VC or an investment banker or a consultant or a lawyer or an accountant or whatever that helps you. And I can only speak from our experience and the companies that we've met and helped, and how important it is to be able to assist an Israeli company or any company in finding a strategic match or an investment or a distributor. And that's obviously something, as Gary pointed out, that we've been doing a lot of. Once you identify the negotiation partner or the giant that you're going to work with, you have to understand, as Gary pointed out, their needs and goals, and to convince the giant that you're the one that can solve that problem, or that can solve what they're looking for, can bring them to where they want to go. You have to match up interests. Usually you're going to be dealing with a company that doesn't have the need to move as quickly as you do. Usually you're going to be dealing with a company that is bureaucratic. You're going to have to figure out where to go and who the right person is to go to in that company to get to where you want to go. And they're going to move slower than you are no matter what. But as an example, one of our early, in terms of meeting a need, and this was not necessarily a business need, but one of our early companies that we worked with in Israel, we introduced to actually one of Gary's clients who was interested in investing in the company and distributing its products throughout Latin America. Unfortunately, for this client, the client was Orthodox, and his one requirement was that nobody work on Shabbat in the company. So what does the guy do? He calls our client at 4:00 p.m. Friday, Miami time, and then tries to tell him that it's not Shabbat. In Israel, it hasn't gotten dark yet; it's only 11 o'clock. That ended the negotiation, unfortunately, and that was one of our first lessons on making sure we were careful in putting people together and making sure they understood each other from an Israeli-U.S. point of view. But to get through the target company, to get through that target company, or to get through with any of these giant companies, one of the things that you really need to have is, in my opinion, is you need to find a champion in that company who's going to push your product or push what you're trying to accomplish or your merger, etc. And the key is that champion not only be someone who's really interested in you, but somebody who has the ability to get it done. So it's someone with power or with authority who can actually make things happen in the giant company that you're looking at, within the confines of what it takes to get something done there. You need to establish that you're unique to that company and unique in the way you benefit them, and you need to watch out for the giant that is really looking to find out what you have and more of a discovery mission. Gary touched on this a little bit in terms of confidentiality agreements and things along that line. I'm in the process of a negotiation now with actually a group of Israelis who have a company that's probably going to sell. It's located in Florida and probably going to sell in the hundreds of millions of dollars. They've hired an investment banker. Had probably 50 NDAs go out. 2 or 3 of their competitors were very hot on trying to sign an NDA, but they were very reluctant to agree to not soliciting employees or to any length of time in terms of not using confidential information. And we learned 2 things. One, our client decided not to sign the NDA with them, and they decided not to go forward. So we figured that they were really not interested in the acquisition, and more interested in really finding out what they could about their competitor. And 2, my client learned something that I have experienced a number of times. The investment banker was really pushing for us to go forward because their interest was really getting a deal done from the point of view of this is another prospective buyer, maybe I can get the deal done, et cetera, as opposed to really worrying about what was in the client's business best interest. And that's sometimes something that you will deal with when you're dealing with the investment bankers. Getting to a good agreement. We talked about knowledge. We talked about a little bit about preparation and confidence being key. And I think also, especially if you're doing an agreement where you're going to be continuing with the company or you're matching, you're going to be working with someone as opposed to an M&A deal, culture is critical. You have to have cultures that match up, and you need to pay attention to what the culture of that company is and whether it's a culture that you can work with. You also have to be realistic. I'd say about 20 years ago, in terms of knowledge and confidence, and I think Ed started out this conference with talking about chutzpah. One of the best chutzpah clients I ever had was a company that came to me about 20 years ago. Thought he was going to go out of business, but he was in the human resources for the medical industry, and he was going to try this one last thing. It was called travel nurse. He called it travel nursing, which was placing nurses in hospitals for 13 to 26 week periods, where hospitals had shortages. You know, they would send nurses to Florida or Hawaii or California, and if it didn't work, we were going to liquidate the company and figure out what to do because he kept losing money on it. A year and a half later, almost 2 years later, he comes back and he's hired an investment banker. This business took off like crazy. We're talking 20 years ago, so when the investment banker said he could probably get maybe close to $20 million for the company. So we started the process, and this guy had more chutzpah than anybody I ever saw. And he's, you know, strict, Protestant, hard-working guy. He's in his will, he's not leaving any money to his kids because he wants them to learn he wants them to earn it themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And they came in, he noticed, and we all noticed right away that the companies that were bidding, which were giants, there were 2 or 3 of them, were very eager to buy his company. By the end of and he just kept saying, I want this, I want this, I want this, and he got it. At the end of the day, we sold the company for $50 million, and they paid his taxes. And this was a company that the investment bankers had valued at $20 million. So I think some of you may be able to talk about something similar to that, but chutzpah is really very important. And if it's smart chutzpah, you've got to have the product and you've got to have something to deliver. Interestingly, 2.5 years later, we represented a brother and his sister and their spouses the sister had worked at the same company and had thought that this was a really great idea. And because this is there wasn't a lot of IP here, this was just a service business. So she waited out her non-compete, started the same business, and they sold their company 2.5 years later for $100 million. So that has nothing to do with our subject, but I just thought it was interesting to tell you. Anyway, confidence that is arrogance can blow a deal. Again, in our early days in Israel, we found a financial partner that was very interested in investing in a company here. The company had worked very hard and called us on several occasions to try and find them someone to invest in the company. We got them finally on the phone with the financial investment partner, and they immediately proceeded to say, why do you want to talk to me? And they had totally turned it around and were trying to negotiate before we even got to the point of finding out if there was anything there for interest. They totally turned off the financial partner, and they lost that deal after the first phone call. So another thing that's important, and I'm trying to pick up on things that weren't talked about that much in the earlier conversations, employment and consulting after acquisitions. It's very unusual. It's not impossible. It is very unusual that if you sell your company, you're not going to have to work there for some period of time or sign some kind of agreement to work if you're the key person. Sometimes you could sign a 3 to 5 year agreement. The truth is that, you know, statistics show that 50% of the people that sign those agreements don't last more than a year. But so what's really important is if you're dealing with your purchase price and you're going to, and Gary alluded to this in another deal, and you're going to have an earnout, make sure you are satisfied, as Gary pointed out, with the money you're getting up front, and you're not going to be, you know, dependent on that earnout to make sure that you that you get the consideration that you want out of the deal. I guess one other issue these days is, will the giant be around to pay at the end of the day if you get the earnout? So you need to be careful about that too. Leadership. I don't think that's been touched on that much. A lot of entrepreneurs like to be the main negotiator. Not all of them do. Some of them put somebody in there. You know, sometimes it's a lawyer, sometimes it's a CFO, sometimes it's somebody else. But there should be someone, one owner of the process. Again, about 15 years ago, I would say, and I hate to say it was this many years ago because I still think I'm 17, but nobody else does, unfortunately. Battery company in Latin America that we represented, the CEO, chairman of the board, hired us to try and negotiate a deal with a public company that was interested in acquiring the company. He had some directors. I mean, this board was about as dysfunctional as a board as you could find. They all hated each other. And I don't really know why, because I had not been representing the company for a long time. So I show up at the first meeting. One director is negotiating a deal on his own with this company, and he's got 4 or 5 of the other directors are interested in working on the same deal. This is a private company, and I walk into the meeting, I sit down, and he asked me to, my client asked me to talk, and 5 of the 7 directors get up, walk out, one of them kicks the door, kicks the table. I mean, it was just terrible. It was like, what am I doing here? And but this is true. And one of them stayed. We talked to the one who stayed. The guy who was negotiating the deal had a lawyer who was helping him. If they had signed that contract, they would have gotten whatever they got out of the deal and probably had to pay it all back because there were so many holes in the contract and the reps and warranties, and the schedules were missing everything that could have possibly protected them. Through very careful talking, we were able to get everybody to understand, at least start to come around to, don't sign this today, it's a bad thing, and eventually we got everybody to get on the same page. They still never liked each other, but we got everybody to get on the same page, and we ended up doubling the price. And you know, it's been a long time, and there were no liabilities. The moral of the story is how important it is, if there's more than 1 or 2 of you, to be on the same page, you know, and not to be contradicting each other. You'll often find one partner who's more willing to sell or more desperate to sell than the other. And that's one of the worst things you can do in a deal, is to split yourselves when you're negotiating with somebody else. It's about as bad a thing as you can try. You have a little friction also sometimes, particularly in Israel, when you have a lot of VC money, between the VC's interests. The VC usually have a certain amount of time to get a return, and the entrepreneur's interest. The entrepreneur wants to hang around as maybe a little longer to make the return a little bit better, but nothing on the scale of what I'm talking about here. We've heard stories about making sure that the other side feels good, that everybody feels good about the deal. We've all talked about that. I'll take it one step further. Occasionally, and particularly when you're dealing with a giant, the other negotiator wants to feel more than good. He wants to feel like he or she won. So the operative word is feel. To feel like you won doesn't mean you have to have won. So, I think that when you're negotiating a deal, one of the most important things is to make sure that some of the things that aren't as important to you, you make someone feel like they are important to you. And you know, again, that's a large part of planning. And that's a part, it relates to education and learning what the other side's interests are, and understanding what might be important to them that you really don't care about, that you can make it look important to you and then deal with later. And getting to where you want, you have to prioritize your issues and your needs. In an ongoing relationship, really consensus is a key to happiness. And each negotiation has its own dynamics. I'm not going to talk a lot about Teva IVAX because we're on tape here, but in that deal had been negotiated twice before. We weren't part of those negotiations. Gary and I like to think that it was completed the third time because they had good lawyers finally, and I don't know who the other lawyers were. So, but pardon? No, I think he did know who the other lawyers were. I will say that it's important to forget whether it's us or anyone else. It's important to have the right team, and it's not necessarily just a function of getting a big firm or a New York firm or a Boston firm or whatever you're looking at. It's also a function of getting a firm that really is used to doing deals in the size and of the type that you're used to. Not all firms are good at handling entrepreneurial deals, and that's true from an accounting and an investment banking point of view also. In IVAX, the agreement was negotiated, by the way, and it was a $10 billion deal at the end of the day. It was negotiated in 4 days with no clients in the room. Really just the lawyers negotiating it and going back and talking to their clients. But one of the questions that was submitted to us earlier was, is it better to meet in person as opposed to meeting on the internet or sending documents back and forth? In reality, what I like to do is to draft, if I have the option, is to draft a document, send it out, get their comments, take what we're going to accept, and then meet. To me, that's really the fastest, most effective way of doing it. But meeting in person does make a big difference. Okay, now we're going to be here till 8:30. I'm glad you made it, though. Anyway, and the key to negotiation, again, I think there are a lot of keys, and I'm not going to really focus on one. One other question we got was the size of the agreement, and anyone else can touch on this later. It doesn't have to be that long, it just has to be good. From a buyer's point of view, there really are 5 or 6 representations that cover almost everything you would need to worry about. We always put in more, and I would always put in more, but we don't have to put in 35 pages of reps and warranties to get a deal done and to be protected. From a seller's point of view, in an M&A deal, you want to be careful on what you're reading. You obviously want to get it down as much as you can, but what you really want to focus on is what's important to you. What are you afraid to say, or what do you need to schedule, and where do you need to put the details in? I'm going to stop. I have more I could go on, but I'm going to stop just in the interest of making sure we get this finished by 8:30, and we'll deal with questions later, and you're up.
Okay. טוב, אני אדבר בעברית לשם שינוי, אז ראשית שיהיה משב של רוח אחרת ואולי קצת נעורר את העניינים. והאמת היא שעשיתי לי רשימה נורא ארוכה ויפה של הרבה מאוד דברים, אבל כמעט כולם כבר כוסו על ידי חבריי המלומדים, וזה בהחלט בצורה נכונה. אז מה שאני אעשה, אני אספר קצת על ההיסטוריה של חלק מהדברים שאני עשיתי, ואני אנסה לגוע בנקודות איך הדברים שאנשים דיברו עליהם ברמה יותר, אולי ברמה קצת יותר תיאורטית, איך הם באמת יתרגמו לחיי המעשה, לפחות בעסקאות שאני עשיתי אותן. שמי רוני רוס, אני הקמתי את חברת פנורמה ב-1993, ואנחנו התחלנו ב-1994 לפתח מוצר בתחום הביזנס אינטליג'נס. זה היה תחום ותיק כבר אז, הוא עדיין תחום מאוד פורה וחזק ומעניין גם היום. זה תחום שבו אנשים לוקחים מידע ממערכות המידע הארגוניות ומכינים אותו לצורך קבלת החלטות, להציג אותו למנהלים בתוך הארגון. כמעט כל ארגון גדול, כמעט בלי יוצא מן הכלל היום, יש לו מערכת ביזנס אינטליג'נס כזו או אחרת. בישראל אני חושבת שיש לפחות 300 ארגונים שמשתמשים במערכות של פנורמה לאורך השנים, ובחלקם בתפוצה מאוד מאוד רחבה. הצורך הזה לקבל החלטות בצורה נכונה מנתונים זה צורך שלא פסק, זה צורך שכל הזמן קיים. כשהקמתי את החברה, למעשה הקמתי אותה לא מתוך מטרה מוגדרת לפתח מוצר, אני הקמתי חברת ייעוץ, אבל לא כל כך הצליח לי בייעוץ, אז עברתי לחברת מוצר, ובאופן משונה דווקא הדבר היותר מורכב ויותר מסובך עלה בידי. מה שתמיד אומר שבשביל להצליח כדאי שיהיו לפחות 2 או 3 כישלונות קודם. אז אחד הדברים שהצליחו בידי במה שעשיתי לגבי פנורמה, זה שאני מההתחלה הבנתי שאני צריכה עם החברה הזו להגיע לשותף בחול. זאת אומרת, זה היה 1994, אף אחד לא מכר שום דבר, VC, האינדסטרי הייתה מאוד מאוד בחיתוליה, כסף מ-VCs לא הצלחתי לגייס באותה תקופה. הדבר היחידי שיכולתי לחשוב עליו זה שאני אגיע לחברה בחוץ, ושאני לחברה בחוץ אני אהיה צריכה לבוא ולהרשים אותם על מנת שיקחו מוצר שלי וישווקו אותו הלאה. ולפיכך באותו זמן אני קיבלתי מספר החלטות שבסופו של דבר מאוד הצדיקו את עצמן, וזה רק דוגמה שאפשר לתכנן גם דבר מהסוג הזה בצורת ההתנהלות שאתה עושה. הדבר הראשון זה שחשבתי שהדבר שהכי טוב שאני אוכל זה שיהיה לי מצבת של לקוחות מאוד משמעותית שאני אוכל להציג לפרטנר פוטנציאלי בחוץ. אז בארץ יש לנו יתרון עצום, שוק קטן, צפוף, לחוץ, פיזיקלי מאוד מאוד קונקטד, אפשר להגיע. אני מכרתי ל-65 חברות בשוק הישראלי לפני שנפגשתי עם חברה זרה ראשונה בחוץ. וזה אפשרי, וזה היווה בשבילי לא רק שוק בטא יוצא מן הכלל, אלא זה גם בנה לעצמי רוסטר של לקוחות, שאיתו יכולתי לבוא אחר כך בגאווה ולהציג ולהגיד הנה מה שהחברה שלי מסוגלת לעשות. זה שוק נהדר, מי שיודע לנצל אותו יכול לנצל אותו, יכול להפיק מזה המון. בשבילנו השוק הישראלי זה שוק הבטא הטוב ביותר גם היום שאנחנו עובדים עם חברות מאוד גדולות ובכל העולם. הנגישות ללקוחות בארץ אין דומה לה. הדבר השני זה הבנתי שאני אסור שיהיו שום מגבלות על ה-IP שלי, כי אני בטח ארצה לעשות איתו משהו, אולי אני ארצה להיכנס לשיתופי פעולה, מי יודע. ובזמנו למשל לא לקחתי כסף מהמדען הראשי, ואת ה-IP מאוד הקפדתי שהוא יהיה משוחרר לכל אורך הדרך. ועבדנו במקביל על פונקציונליות מאוד עתירה, של דבר ששוב יתאפשר לנו בזכות השוק הישראלי. בסופו של דבר, פנורמה הייתה חברה קטנה, מכרתי באופן די אגרסיבי בשוק הישראלי. קודם, גם אחת ההחלטות שלי הייתה שכדאי שהלקוחות שלי יבואו ממגוון מאוד גדול של תחומים, על מנת שהמוצר יהיה מאוד רובסט ויוכל להוכיח את עצמו כמוצר שמסוגל לתמוך בפונקציונליות מאוד עתירה ללקוחות רבים. ואז כשמכרתי, נניח, הלקוח הראשון היה חברת ביטוח, הלקוח השני שלי היה שירות בתי הסוהר, הלקוח השלישי היה בנק לאומי, הלקוח הרביעי היה קרמל אולפינים, הלקוח החמישי משרד הביטחון. זאת אומרת, כל לקוח שעשיתי רצתי ללקוח, איך שמכרתי רצתי ללקוח הבא בתוך אינדוסטרי לגמרי אחר. זה לא היה כל כך אפקטיבי מבחינת הכנסות, כי יכולתי לשבת אצל כל לקוח ולהוציא הרבה יותר כסף לעשות אימפלמנטציה חוזרות ונשנות אצל לקוחות, אותם לקוחות. אבל בסופו של דבר המוצר שלי הלך והשתכלל מלקוח ולקוח. אני מאוד מאמינה, במיוחד בתחום התוכנה, במוצרים חיים שיש להם לקוחות שניזונים מפידבק של לקוחות, שלקוחות נותנים את הפידבק פנימה. ואני חושבת שהעובדה שאחרי 1.5 שנה היה לנו מוצר מדהים מבחינת יכולות, זה בזכות הלקוחות הישראלים שעשו לנו כל כך הרבה שירות טוב. בסופו של דבר, אחרי 1.5 שנה, 60 לקוחות בשוק הישראלי, חברה רווחית, שנה ראשונה חברה רווחית, בלי מימון, כמעט, קצת כסף מאנג'לים ששמנו במגירה, just for a rainy day, ואנחנו מחפשים איך להגיע לשותפים בחוץ. והדבר ראשון, אנחנו נוסעים לתערוכה, ואנחנו מצליחים שם ליצור קצת קשרים, אנחנו מוצאים שם אנליסט, הוא מבטיח לעשות לנו קשרים בחול, הוא קובע לנו כמה פגישות עם פרטנרים אפשריים בארצות הברית, ובין השאר, כמה ימים, שבועיים קודם, אני הלכתי פה לכנס של גרטנר ביוני 95, פגשתי את המנכ"ל של מייקרוסופט ישראל, סיפרתי לו עד כמה המוצר הנהדר שאני פיתחתי עובד בטכנולוגיות מייקרוסופט, כמה זה מוצר מקסים ומאוד אוריינטד למייקרוסופט, הוא אמר, יש לי את הבן אדם הנכון במייקרוסופט שתוכל לדבר איתו, כי במקרה אנחנו קצת מסתכלים על הנושא הזה. שלחתי אימייל, קיבלתי תשובה, הוא ביקש ממני שאני אשלח קצת חומר, שלחתי, אתם יודעים, את שני הדפים שמתארים את המוצר, אז עוד לא היו ובסייט כל כך מפותחים, וכמובן שאז אני נקטתי בשיטה המאוד בטוחה של להגן על ה-IP שלי, לא סיפרתי שום דבר על מה מיוחד במה שאני עושה, לא דיברתי בכלל על האופטימיזציות שעשינו בתחום של מסדי נתונים רב-ממדיים, ואיך יש לנו מערכת שיודעת ללמוד ממה שהמשתמשים עושים, ולכן עושה אופטימיזציה של מסדי הנתונים שאנחנו מפתחים. ואת כל הדברים האלה כמובן שמרתי בסודיות מוחלטת, ואז קיבלתי אימייל בחזרה שהבחור עונה לי, תשמעי, זה מאוד נחמד, אבל זה נראה more of the same ממה שחברות אחרות עשו, ואנחנו לא חושב שזה דבר שבאמת נורא נורא מעניין. אז כתבתי לו, אוקיי, בואו נחתום על NDA ואני אספר לך מה אנחנו עושים. אז הוא ענה לי, מייקרוסופט לא חותמת NDA, אנחנו להפך, אנחנו מבקשים שתחתמי לנו שכל מה שאת מספרת לנו הוא לא סודי, ושלפחות לקוח אחד, שני לקוחות ראו את זה כבר, כי אנחנו לא רוצים לחשוף את עצמנו. אז פה הכלל, רבותיי, אני קיבלתי את ההחלטה שאם מייקרוסופט תחליט לעשות את מה שאני עושה, זה לא יעזור לי כלום, אם הם ידעו מה שאני עושה או לא ידעו מה שאני עושה. אני כתבתי את כל מה שאני יודעת לגבי הטכנולוגיה שלי בפרטי פרטים, כתבתי על זה non-confidential ושלחתי. ולא קרה כלום. אוקיי, טוב, לא קרה כלום. אולי הם יושבים מפתחים, מה אני יודעת. נקבע לנו פגישה לא, פשוט, בלבלתי. בכל מקרה, כתבתי למייקרוסופט שאנחנו הולכים להיות בסביבה, ואולי אפשר בכל זאת להיפגש איתם, כי אנחנו במילא כבר נמצאים בסביבה ואנחנו יכולים לעבור שם. אז זה לא בסדר, אם זה לא במיוחד, הם לא במיוחד להיפגש איתנו, כי אם באים אלינו כל כך הרבה גופים, אז אתם יכולים לבוא. ואז למחרת, סוף סוף הם קראו את החומר. כנראה שאז זה נתן להם טריגר לקרוא את מה שכתבנו. הם כתבו בסדר, תבואו, ואגב, די מעניין מה שאתם הראיתם לנו, יבואו הרבה אנשים מאופיס, יבואו אנשים מסיקול, יבואו אנשים מכל הגופים, יהיו 10 אנשים. אוקיי, התרגשות גדולה. כשיצאנו לדרך, אנחנו כתבנו פרזנטציה. אנחנו נפגשנו היו לנו איזה 6 או 7 פגישות במזרח ארצות הברית לפני שנסענו לסיאטל. אנחנו, איך שהיינו יוצאים מפגישה, היינו מתיישבים במכונית במגרש החנייה ועושים דיבריפינג. מה הלך, מה לא הלך. מתי הסתכלו עלינו בצורה שנראה לנו שהם האמינו למה שדיברנו, מתי הם הסתכלו עלינו וזה נראה שזה לא נראה כל כך מתאים, כאילו ככה, יעני, אתה יודע, האמריקאים הם לא אומרים, אבל גם לפי התגובות ולפי שפת הגוף אתה יכול לנחש. אנחנו אחרי כל פגישה, אנחנו שיפרנו את המצגת. כשהגענו לפגישה במייקרוסופט, היה לנו מצגת כנראה מושלמת, לפחות ככה אני חושבת, היה מושלמת, ולא רק זה, אז ומאז כל הזמן, המצגת הזו הייתה מותאמת למייקרוסופט ב100%. היא דיברה בלינגו של מייקרוסופט, היא השתמשה בטרמינולוגיה של מייקרוסופט, לפי כל החבר'ה שלי בפיתוח הלכו לכנסים של מייקרוסופט, שמעו מה אנשים אומרים, לאן מייקרוסופט מתכוונת ללכת, כל דבר שמייקרוסופט מתכוונת ללכת, איכשהו נכנס אצלנו למצגת, באיזשהו אופן. בקיצור, בנינו מצגת. אחר כך הסתבר, לא משנה, אחר כך הסתבר שכשהם שמעו את המצגת שלנו, הם חשבו שאנחנו קראנו את תוכניות הפיתוח שלהם. כבר הייתה להם תוכנית, איזה מוצר הם הולכים לפתח בתחום שלנו, ומה הם הולכים לעשות. באנו לפגישה, אני אעשה את זה קצר, הייתה לנו פגישה מאוד מאוד מוצלחת. היו 10 אנשים, הם נשארו כל הזמן, הם לא עזבו, הם התעניינו, הם שאלו שאלות. אני סיפרתי להם שיש לנו 60 לקוחות מכל סוגי האינדוסטרי, זה אפשריים וזה וזה, והראינו פונקציונליות. זה היה יוצא מן הכלל. ואז הם ביקשו לצאת, הם יצאו, חזרו אחרי 5 דקות וביקשו מאיתנו להישאר לפגישה נוספת אחרי הצהריים. טוב, שינינו את התוכניות, הלכנו איתם לארוחת צהריים, ועל ארוחת הצהריים, הבחור שישב לשמאלי, הוא היה בן 26, בג'ינס, חולצה מאוהה, אומר לי, תשמעי, יש לכם מוצר יפה, חבר'ה טובים, אנחנו חברה טובה בשיווק ומחירות, שקלתם למכור לנו את החברה? אז זהו, וככה זו הייתה עסקת המחירה הראשונה שלי, שמה למקום, ואני הדבר היחידי שאני אומרת לעצמי בלב, רק שלא ישאל אותי כמה כסף אני רוצה, כי אין לי שמץ של מושג מה לבקש. וככה עשיתי את העסקה הראשונה, לא investment banking, לא שום דבר, לא היה לי מושג על valuation, לא ידעתי בכלל, אני מכרתי אז באותה שנה $800,000. זו הייתה השנה השנייה, כן? זאת אומרת, אתם יכולים לתאר לעצמכם, וההשקעה שלי בפיתוח בטח לא עלתה על $500,000. בפגישה שאלו אותי 3 שאלות, זה היה כבר וייס פרזידנט, שימו לב, מייקרוסופט קיבלה החלטה ב10 דקות שהיא הולכת להציע רכישה לחברה, לא משנה, זה לא היה רכישה ענקית, אבל זה רק מעיד על איזה חברה דינמית וטובה ובריאה זו הייתה, שמישהו קיבל הסמכה, יכול היה להרגיש empowered ללכת לבקש מהבוס שלו, to pop the question אחרי פגישה כל כך קצרה. ונשאלתי 3 שאלות. האם יש סיבה חוקית שאני לא אוכל למכור את הטכנולוגיה? כעת מאחר שלא לקחתי כסף מהמדען הראשי והקפדתי שה-IP יהיה נקי, לא הייתה שום סיבה. שאלה שנייה הייתה, מי מקבל את ההחלטות אצלך בארגון, ולצערי אף VC לא רצה לחתום לידי, אז לא הייתה לי ברירה אלא להגיד שזה רק אני. והשאלה השלישית הייתה כמה כסף אני רוצה, שזו הייתה שאלה מאוד לא פיירית. ואני יצאתי בזה שאמרתי, אני רוצה בין לבין, וקצת גמגמתי, ולמזלי נפלתי בול על התחום שבו מייקרוסופט כנראה הרגישה שזה לגיטימי. Okay, תגידו לי, אוקיי, אז שהגעת לנגושיישן, מה עושים? איך עכשיו דואגים לכך שהמחיר יהיה גבוה? איך בעצם, אם נניח, אמרת להם, נניח בין 20 ל-30, איך את דואגת לכך שהם לא יבואו ויגידו 5? למה לא? את חברה קטנה, את חברה חסרת אונים, אין לך שום דבר להציע, 6 אנשי פיתוח, את לא יכולה להראות יותר מזה. וזה נכון, לא היה לי לא מלטיפול על רבניו, לא היה לי מלטיפול על זה. הדבר היחידי, time to market. וזה באמת היה הסיבה היחידה שבגלל זה מייקרוסופט ראתה בזה את הדבר הכי טוב. הם ראו time to market, הם ראו צוות, הם ראו טכנולוגיה מוכחת, הם ראו טכנולוגיה שעובדת אצל לקוחות. יושב שם הבחור ממולי והוא יודע, אני צריך עכשיו לפתח, אני אגייס מפה, משם, אני אביא 2 אנשים מרוסיה, אני אביא מפה, אני אביא משם, עד שהם יתגבשו לי לצוות, עד שהם יהיו מסוגלים לפתח, עד שזה הכל יעבוד, זה כן יעבוד, זה לא יעבוד, פה יש לי משהו שעובד, מדבר מייקרוסופטי, הוא לגמרי קרוב אליי, הוא מתאים בדיוק למה שאני רוצה. ובסופו של דבר עשיתי תרגיל די נחמד בעניין של הנגושיישן על הכסף. יום לפני שהתחילה הנגושיישן, שאגב היה 3 שיחות טלפון של 20 דקות, פשוט שיחות טלפון עם סיאטל, הלכתי לאינבסטמנט בנקר וביקשתי מאיתם valuation, הם כמובן הצליחו להגיע לאיזשהו valuation מופרח גבוה ביותר, ויום לפני שלחתי את המסמך וכתבתי בתחכום רב שאומנם אומרים שאני שווה 50 מיליון, אבל אני, a man of my word, אני לא מבקשת גרוש יותר מ-30 מיליון. כי זה מה שאמרתי בהתחלה, בין 20 ל-30. עכשיו נראה אותו שיבואו ויתחיל נמוך. אז כן, באופן מצחיק זה עבד. אנחנו באיזשהו מקום בכל זאת נשארנו בתוך הגבולות הראשונים של מה שדיברנו, ונפגשנו באמצע. פשוט ביקשתי. התעקשתי, אמרתי עכשיו דיברנו על זה, אני אמרתי מההתחלה שזה התחום שבו אני רוצה להיות, שום דבר לא השתנה לרעה מאז שהם ראו את מה שאני דיברתי והיום, ולכן אנחנו נפגשנו באמצע והצלחנו להגיע להבנה. כן, מה שאני שיחקתי במשא ומתן הזה היה את עוצמתו של החלש. לאורך כל משא המתן הזה שהיה ביני לבינם, אני כל פעם שהייתה לי בעיה, שמתי את זה על השולחן שלהם ואמרתי תעזרו לי לפתור. אני קטנה, אני לא יודעת מה עושים עם זה. השאלה הראשונה שהייתה לי, זה היה 1996, הבן אדם היחידי ששאלתי אותו, אני לא רוצה להגיד את שמו, לגבי מה דעתו, אם יש לי סיכוי לעשות עסקה עם מייקרוסופט, כי הם הציעו לקנות את החברה, אמר לי, מייקרוסופט, הם יבואו, הם יעשו דיו דיליג'נס, הם ילמדו מה שיש לך, ואחר כך הם ימצאו תירוץ לא לקנות, והם יעשו את זה לבד. ואגב, שתדעו לכם, לכל אורך דרך הם אמרו לי, אנחנו משאירים לעצמנו את הזכות להמשיך לפתח את המוצר, במוצר משלנו, אם זה לא יצא לפועל. שזה לחץ לא נורמלי. אז דבר ראשון שהייתי בפגישה, בשיחה הראשונה עם העורכי דין, אמרתי, אני מבקשת שתגידו לי, כולם אומרים לי שאתם תבואו, תעשו due diligence, אחר כך אתם לא תעשו את העסקה, ואתם תפתחו את זה בעצמכם, ואני לא יודעת איך להתנהג. תגידו לי מה לעשות. תתפלו, זה עבד. אז ראשית, מסתבר, מייקרוסופט אמרו לי, תראי, היו לנו 30 משאים ומתנים השנה. סגרנו 28. אחד לא הצליח כי לא קיבלנו אישור מהממשל. זה היה קוויקן, מי שזוכר. השני, לא הצלחנו להגיע להסכמה על המחיר. אבל אנחנו מוכנים שמבין ה-28 אני אתן לכם 5-6 קונטקט שעובדים היום במייקרוסופט שמכרו לנו. דברים איתם. מה שהיה פשוט מדהים בעיניי, איך הם פתרו לי את הבעיה. אחר כך היה סיפור, אמרתי, תראו, אני רוצה שתחתמו לי, שאתם לא תיקחו לי את העובדים. הם אמרו לי, ביל גייטס, אלוהים, אמר שאנחנו לא מגבילים את עצמנו בכלל במה שקשור לעובדים. אז אמרתי, אוקיי, אז תגידו לי, איך אתם פותרים לי את הבעיה? כי אני אהיה נורא במתח כל הזמן. אז הם הציעו לי פתרון. בקיצור, לכל אורך המשא ומתן, אין בעיה. זאת אומרת, גם לגוף החלש יש יכולת מול הגוף החזק. זה לא מתנהל ככה, כי בסופו של דבר את המשא ומתן אתה עושה עם אנשים. והבן אדם שישב מולי ידע שהוא צריך אותי ואת הקבוצה שלי אחרי זה, כקבוצה עובדת ומרוצה, ומתפקדת לאורך הזמן, ולכן בסופו של דבר המשא ומתן עבד לא בכוח, אלא עבד מאוד מאוד יפה בצורה של שיתוף פעולה. והוא נסגר תוך זמן מאוד מאוד קצר. הדיו דיליג'נס כמובן לא היה מאוד מאוד מורכב, והוא נסגר תוך זמן מאוד מאוד קצר. קבוצת הפיתוח שלי עברה למייקרוסופט, ואגב נשארה שם כקבוצה אחת מלוכדת. במשך 10 שנים הובילו את הפיתוח של המוצר שקוראים לו Analysis Services במייקרוסופט, שזה אחת ההצלחות הגדולות של מייקרוסופט, עשה אינישיישן לכל ה-BI סטרטג'י של מייקרוסופט, שזה היה דבר מאוד מרשים. אז דיברנו קצת על כמה דברים שיש פה. בעקבות העסקה הזו, העסקה היא נסגרה בתור עסקה של מחירת טכנולוגיה ולא מחירת חברה, כי אני רציתי להמשיך לתמוך בלקוחות שלי. בעקבות זה המשכתי לעבוד עם מייקרוסופט בתור פרטנרית. המשכתי לפתח מוצרים שמשלימים את מה שמייקרוסופט עשתה, ועשיתי עוד מספר עסקאות. בין השאר הייתה לי עסקה למשל עם חברת קוגנוס הקנדי. אני באתי אליהם והצעתי להם למכור את המוצר שהיה לי ב-1998 שמשלים את מייקרוסופט. ופה אגב זה דוגמה, שאנחנו נופל לתוך הדוגמה שגרי תיאר מקודם. הם באו ואמרו שהם רוצים לעשות איתי עסקת OEM אקסקלוסיבית. היה פה סיכון, קוגנוס היה מוצר מתחרה למוצר שלי. לי היו שיקולים משלי שידעתי שעבור סכום מסוים אני מוכנה לחיות גם עם זה שהם לא ימכרו את המוצר שלי בצורה אפקטיבית בעולם, אבל אם הם ישלמו לי איזשהו סכום למשך תקופה אני מוכנה לחיות עם זה. והיו לי זה, היו שיקולים לא רק כלכליים אלא מגבלות שהיו לי בחוזה עם מייקרוסופט. עוד הייתי תחת 5 שנים של מייקרוסופט. בסופו של דבר עשיתי באמת עסקה שקיבלנו הרבה מאוד כסף הפרון, ובאמת בסופו של דבר העסקה מבחינה מסחרית לא הייתה מאוד מאוד מוצלחת, אבל כלכלית היא הייתה מאוד מוצלחת. ואחרי זה המשכנו, פיתחנו את הדור הבא, יצאנו עם מוצר חדש, גייסנו כסף מ-VCs, עשינו גם כסף עם VCs, 3 סיבובי השקעה, כל הסיפורים עם preferences וככה וככה וכל השאר וכל הדברים האלה. שכחתם להזכיר רצ'ט, תזכיר, תשאלו אותם אחר. רצ'ט. ואני מתה על זה, מתה על המשפט. רצ'ט, אוף, כל כך סקסי. בכל מקרה, אני יכולה להגיד לכם עוד כמה דברים לגבי שיתוף פעולה עם חברות גדולות. אחד הדברים בחברות גדולות, שזה לא, זה נכון שזה נראה שאתה עושה עסקה עם בן אדם אחד, אבל הרבה פעמים, במיוחד אם זה עסקאות OEM או VAR, אתה בעצם צריך לעזור לאנשים שלך להצליח בתוך הארגון. על מנת שהעסקה תצליח, אם אתה נניח עושה עסקת OEM, אז יש מישהו שממש חושב שזה רעיון מצוין, חותם איתך את החוזה, אבל בינינו, אחר כך מי שצריך למכור את זה זה אנשי המחירות. ומי שצריך לעשות את זה מרקטינג זה אנשי המרקטינג, ואנשי הפרודקט צריכים לתמוך וכו' וכו'. זה לא מספיק. כשאתה משתדך לחברה גדולה, אתה צריך לבנות לעצמך את מפת הארגון, ולמפות אנשים שלך מול התחומים השונים של הארגון הזה, ולעבוד מולם. אנחנו מיפינו, הייתה תקופה שהיינו פרטנרים של מייקרוסופט, מיפינו את מייקרוסופט. היו לאנשי מחירות שעבדו מול אנשי המחירות של מייקרוסופט, והיו צריכים לדווח שהם עובדים נגד מי, איך הם הביאו את אנשי מייקרוסופט לסיבובי מחירה וכו', איך הם דאגו לכך שלאנשי מייקרוסופט יהיה טוב, שהם ירגישו שהם יכולים להצליח. היה לנו אנשי המרקטינג עבדו מאנשי המרקטינג, אנשי הפרודקט מול אנשי הפרודקט. זאת אומרת, המערכת הייתה הרבה יותר מורכבת, זה מאוד מורכב וקשה. זה לא מספיק שאתה חותם חוזה ושם את זה אצלו בחצר. הוא צריך to deliver, ואתה יודע מה? הרבה פעמים הוא doesn't deliver, כי המערכת לא עובדת, המערכת לא מתפקדת. וזה בעיה שלך בסופו של דבר, המוצר שלך, אתה צריך לדאוג לכך שהוא יצליח. כן. התבקשתי גם לענות על שאלה של מה עושים עם העניין הזה של הבדלי תרבויות. אחד הדברים שמאוד משונים לנו כישראלים זה שאתה יושב עם אמריקאים בישיבה אחרי זה יוצא, תגיד, אתה יודע מה הם התכוונו? זאת אומרת, אני לא יודעת, זאת אומרת, זה עדיין קורה לי, זאת אומרת, למרות כל כך הרבה שנים והכל, אני עדיין יוצאת ואני עדיין יושבת ומנסה לגלגל בראש ולהיות בטוחה שבאמת הבנתי. ומה הסיבה? הרבה מאוד פעמים הם את הדברים הרעים פשוט לא אוהבים להגיד. הם לא אומרים, חינכו אותם בית ספר, דברים רעים לא אומרים. ולכן הם אומרים רק את הדברים החיוביים, אבל למעשה יש דברים שנשארים שם מתחת לפני השטח שהם מאוד גדולים ומאוד בעייתיים, וזה הדברים שלא דוברו ולא נאמרו. אני גיליתי שזה עובד טוב מאוד, באמת לנסות לשאול אותם, אם אתה מרגיש שיש משהו, come out, ask, לא קרה שום דבר, תשאל, תגיד, אני מחמיץ פה משהו, יש הרגשה לא נוחה, יכול להיות שיש משהו שאני מפספס, ויכול להיות שתקבל את התשובה הנכונה, זה חוסך המון כאב לב והמון כאב ראש אחר כך. ואין מה לעשות, אנחנו לא נולדנו לתוך זה, ומאוד מאוד מאוד קשה להפנים את המסרים האלה. אני יודעת שאני מקבלת רזומה של מישהו, או אני מקבלת חוות דעת על מישהו, אתה ישר יודע מה הבעיות שלו, זה לפי מה שלא כתוב. וכתוב שהבחור חרוץ, הוא חרוץ, אבל הוא לא מביא תוצאות. לא כתוב, כתוב מביא תוצאות, לא כתוב, הוא לא יביא תוצאות. ואין קונצים, מה שאפשר להגיד דבר טוב הם כותבים, מה שאי אפשר להגיד דבר טוב הם לא כותבים. עוד דבר, מילה אחרונה לגבי איך בונים עסקאות. הניסיון שלי, במיוחד בארצות הברית, זה לעשות את זה פשוט. הסיסטם עובדת. כל פעם שניסינו לעשות משהו חריג, זה עלה לנו ביוקר. העסקה הנוכחית היא תמיד הבסיס לעסקה הבאה. כמה שהעסקה הנוכחית תהיה פשוטה, מהירה, יותר קלה להבנה, גם על ידי הגופים הבאים שיבואו, אתה תחסוך לעצמך המון כאב לב, המון כאב ראש והמון בעיות. ועוד טיפ שאני לא רוצה להיכנס לפרטים שלו, זה להשתדל להימנע ממקלטי מס. זה עולה המון כסף, וזה לא תמיד מביא את התוצאות. אז עם זה תודה רבה לכם.
I'm in a big problem, Robbie. You destroyed my yes, now I'm starting from too high. My name is Yigal Rotem. I'm the co-founder of a startup company that became a public company that was sold eventually, called Power Design. I have a presentation that we can go through very quickly. But let me add one element, which I think some of you may know, which is called luck. So we are negotiating a deal. Let me take a step back. Power Design filed an F1 in 2000 to go public around August-July timeframe. The leading banks were DLJ, Piper Jeffries, and Dane Rush Wessels. We completed everything. The filing was clean. We got the clearance from the SEC. We're just about to go to the roadshow. And DLJ were acquired by Credit Suisse for, I think, $11 billion. In 2 weeks, all the research analysts, the bankers, the people that worked on our deal were gone from the firm and gone from our transaction. I met Credit Suisse. They said, no problem, we'll take you public. After 1 hour, I realized that it's not going to happen. The market started to crash, and I'm finding myself at the end of 2000 practically with no money. We hired a bank called Robinson Stevens, the late Robinson Stevens, year 2001. I'm meeting with investors on Monday. The guy's laid off on Thursday. After, I think, 3 months, and by the way, all our financing round from start to money in the bank took no more than 8 weeks. I realized that we're not going to see money from the US. We go to Europe. We were, I think, lucky, meeting Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank was relatively a new VC, was less harmed by the crash, and gave us an offer for 30 million euros. To make a very long story short, horrible due diligence, British people with German mentality, unbelievable. At a certain point in time, they had more people doing due diligence on the company than employees that I had, really. And we made, everything was cleared, finalized, and negotiated a few times. And then we scheduled the signing of the agreement, and the lawyers prepare all the documents to be signed. It was September 11th, 5 p.m. Israel time. So how much luck can you get? You go to an IPO, your banker is being acquired. You finally get an investor, and the investor is almost going to meet his creator. And the lady that had the power of attorney to sign the agreement called me and said, I got a crazy phone call from my boss. He's in the Deutsche Bank building near the World Trade Center, and I'm taking the hell out of Israel. Don't worry, I'll get to Rome. You'll get the signature pages signed. It will be fine. Never got the signature pages that day, or not a few weeks thereafter. Eventually, 4 weeks, we renegotiated. With slight tweaks, we finalized the deal. So sometimes you need luck. Okay, few words about Power Design. The company was established in 1995. Two co-founders with some background and some experience in high tech. And by the way, we were both very lucky to do something which is, I think, quite unique. We founded the company. We stayed as management throughout its entire life. I did all the financing of the company, five rounds. Took the company public in 2004 eventually, and sold the company as a public company in a public-to-public transaction in 2006. When we sold the company was selling for $40 million. The company will do this year over $60 million. And I'm very proud to say that it is the most profitable piece of the entire Microsemi organization, doing 37.5% EBITDA. And I'm saying that because one of the things that is so important for me personally is that an acquisition, and I think you need to remember that, a good acquisition doesn't end by signing the documents and getting the check. You test, you measure good acquisitions years after. 2 years after the acquisition, I'm still part of Power Design Microsemi. I don't hold an official position there because I don't think that the future of the company is with me, but I'm there to make sure that this will be a great acquisition for both parties. When Microsemi bought Power Design, Microsemi stock was around $18. It hit almost $30 a few weeks ago, and with a lot related to Power Design contribution. And I think that this is a criteria that each one of you guys that hopefully will be fortunate to sell his venture needs to remember. In a nutshell, we do power over Ethernet. It's a market that we created. We own the IP, and we became the market leader, not just through technology but also business. Practically every major company in telecommunication, data communication was our customer, including this small company. So how the whole thing started? We are in a joint venture and partnership. The first customer that we have was Telrad. And again, some of you may know that I negotiated the deal with Telrad in 95 and practically enabled the company to start its business. And Telrad took a very brave decision, I must say, to deal with small company. I was very fortunate that no one at Telrad asked me ever, how many people are working at Power Design? Because in 1995 we were 2.5 employees. And they didn't ask, and I haven't said the number of employees because they didn't ask. But one day I'm getting a phone call, look, we're coming to do an audit. I said, what the hell is audit all about? I said, well, we are going to check the manufacturing to see if you have processes in the company. We are going to submit significant orders. And I was panicking. One of the things we did in order to make Telrad the thing that we have many employees, I bought shirts with Power Design logo to all the people in our floor, including Butterfly Communication that some of you may know. And I told them, look, you are not Power Design employees, but this is my gift for the day. If they will ask you, will say that you are not working for Power Design, but the bottom line was that they realized that we are a very small company, but we are using subcontractors, and it was fine because they really needed Power Design. We signed a $2.5 million contract with them. 1999, Power Design reinventing itself with DSL products, and we go straight to the giants. One of my best advice is deal with the market leader. Don't be afraid. If you won't deal with the market leader, you get tons of promises and no business. We eventually succeeded to persuade Pergain that we own the best components in the market. Back then, we had a fantastic agreement. The company almost went bankrupt. Not Pergain, Power Design, because our quality assurance was not good enough. And although in my background I came from Modi'in, and we thought that we know how to design things that will last forever, what I didn't realize is that when you ship hundreds of thousands of modules, even 1%, these are a lot of modules that go wrong. And for a giant company, this is far more than they can tolerate. Eventually it was fixed. 2001, the company is reinventing itself, and we make a decision that we want to become an IC company. Again, we made the decision that we are going to partner with the best possible technology that there is in the market. Back then, Motorola Semiconductor or Freescale had and still have the best mixed signal technology, high voltage in the market. Major issue to deal with a company that have their own products. They want to get your product and put this product into their website, into their price list, in order to sell the product to their own customers. If they will do that, no one ever will buy from a small company. Because one thing you need to understand, no one wants to deal with small company. And unfortunately, in some cases, I'm advising VCs, and I'm doing the diligence on small companies, and people are saying to me, look, we're going to sell to this company, and this company, and this company, and we have much better product, and it's cheaper, and it's more innovative. And I'm saying, guys, you don't understand what is happening in the market. Cisco today will not buy from a company like Power Design, even if Power Design will give Cisco its ICs for $0. Because they made a decision a few years back that from 2,500 suppliers, by the end of this decade, they will have less than 200. And they are going to reach this number even lower. Which means, if you are a one-trick pony, you will not sell to these people, period. No matter what kind of technology you offer them. And you need to understand that. So for us to try to sell to mid-market and then hopefully to be so important and have such a strong IP position to be able to sell to the giants was critical. Few advice along the way. Please do remember this sentence, the bottom line. Business is being done between people. So you have to have the right team from the other side of the table. If you don't have trust, and if you don't have a real champion, someone who can deliver on the other side, you're wasting your time. I think one of the most important advice that I can say in respect to power design history and experience is the IP. We were fortunate to understand the importance of IP early in the game. And I took, I don't know if a stupid or brave decision, that we're going to put a lot of money into it, and I've hired an IP editor to the company, because using an external law firm was far too expensive and not efficient. In 3 years, we have generated patents more than many of the big tech companies in Israel. And the reason for that is, if you are small, many times IP is the only thing that you have when you're negotiating with the big companies. 2 years before we were acquired, we have embarked on a litigation campaign. Litigation in the US for an IP, and correct me, gentlemen, if I'm wrong, $5 million, that's the beginning of the journey. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe this is $10 million today. Okay. Realizing that, I've hired another guy who is an IP litigator to become a power design employee in order to make it extremely efficient in-house process. We have litigated 6 times, including Texas Instruments. All these litigations came to settlement within less than 6 months, after the other side realized I can litigate forever because I'm paying salary and I'm not paying millions. You have to have a strong IP position to do that. We felt that we do have a strong IP position to do that. Thank you. Question?
Possible to connect יש חיבור עכשיו? יש חיבור ש...
לא שלחת לנו כדי קודם?
לא התחלתי דבר אז יש.
Short technical break. Very short.
אתה רוצה להחזיר עם דיסק-און-קי פשוט? עכשיו אולי? נראה לי שעכשיו. זה עכשיו? כן? זה 2007 או 2003? כי אני חושב פה משהו.
So the question is, does anyone have any questions? Nope. Go ahead.
לא, מה ש...
כמה זמן שהם ירצו שיקח להם להגיע משל שנה וחצי, של 30, של 20, של 50, כמה זה היה עולה להם להגיע אותו?
האמת היא שלדעתי גם שייך למרקט לא יצדיק את זה, כי בסופו של דבר באופן ממש מצחיק זה לקח להם שנתיים מה שהם קנו עד שהם יצאו. זאת אומרת, זה אפילו לקח הרבה יותר ממה שאנחנו חשבנו שזה לקח. אבל כאילו על שנה זה היה בגלל הטיים to market.
זה כותב.
אני אומרת שוב, זה היה פשוט עניין של ככה ביקשתי, לא בגלגשתי אחרת, אי אפשר היה להסביר את זה בשום צורה שלי, לא הייתה שום משחק, מה? אני מעריכה שזה היה עולה, אני לא יודעת אפילו עם כמה זה היה עולה להם, אם זה היה עולה להם חצי, אתה יודע, זה גם לא מה שחשוב, מה שחשוב מבחינתם זה הוודאות של מיושם להם המוצר הנכון, וזה מה שהיה להם, וזה עשה להם שוק ענק. בסופו של דבר עשה להם שוק מיליונים, וזה מה שחשוב. זאת אומרת, והם יכלו להיכשל, כי בתחום שלנו כן אפשר להיכשל. אם אתה לא מתכנן נכון, ואתה בונה את הטכנולוגיה לא נכון, אז אתה נכשל, או לפחות אתה יכול, אני אומר לך מה יכול לקרות, אם היו יוצאים אחרי שנתיים ממוצר, זה הוורז'ן 1, והם לא יכולים למכור אותו, והם צריכים לעשות עוד פעם כזה. לא יודעת איך להסביר את זה, שכל דבר זה עצמאי, ומה שגיליתי זה ששכחתי להגיד את זה בהרצאה, מה שאני הבנתי בסופו של דבר, הצלחתי את השיחה להבין מה הנקודה שבה הווייס פרזידנט שאיתו דיברתי מסוגל לחתום עליה, ומאיזה מקום הוא צריך ללכת למעלה לבקש אישור. ועל המספר הזה סגרתי. לי זה התודה.
סליחה, רותם, אבל לא רוצה לדבר פשוט לגבי IT, אמרת שהקפדתי ש-IT נקים מבעיות מעמדן הרשמי וכו'. כן. אבל יכול להיות שבעצם בעסקה הזאת הדבר הכי חשוב למה חושב שהיה בעצם ה-IT. האם זה היה משהו שהם יכלו לעקוף אותו, שהם היו במצבים?
אני לא מאמינה בתכונה ב-IT. יהיה אנשים ולא שם.
Everybody hear the question?
שאלו אותי אם ה-IP באמת היה, מה היה חשוב למייקרוסופט ה-IP? אני חושבת שבסופו של דבר הצוות ב-ongoing process זה הדבר הכי בקשה.
לא, אבל מה שאני מתכוון זה, האם הגעתם למצב שה-IP שלך בעצם סגר את המוצר בצורה כזאת שהם לא יכולו לעשות את זה לאשר את הפטנט?
לא היה לי אף לא היה לי שום...
למה אתה מתכוונת ה-IP זה לא
התכוונתי לזה שה-IP לא היה... היה לי ניסיון קודם עם המדען הראשי שהטיל מגבלות לעשות משהו מוצר שפתחתי באמצעותו.
בעצם באתי מיקרוסופט בלי פטנט?
בלי פטנט, בלי כלום. בלי כלום. אבל זה תוכנה. תוכנה זה אחרת, באמת.
Alright, let's go back to the program. Don't worry.
אוקיי, שומעים אותי? כן. אז אני אייל הרצוג, אני היזם של מטה קפה ועבר עם ארנון דינור בקונטקט נטוורקס.
המצגת שאני הולך לתת לכם, אני נותן את הפעם ראשונה היום, פשוט איזשהו רעיון שהיה לי אחרי שבכמה, אפשר לומר, שנים האחרונות, הרבה מאוד יזמים מתייעצים איתי בנושא של דווקא negotiation עם קרנות הון סיכון. מספרים לי שהם דיברו עם כאלה ועם אחרים והם לא יודעים מה לעשות ולהתקשר אליהם ולשלוח להם. מאוד מנסים להתייעץ איתי בכל מה שקשור לאינטראקציה ותהליך הגיוס. אני יודע שזה טיפה אוף טופיק, אבל אני חושב שזה negotiation גם שמאוד חשוב לדעת איך לנהל אותו. ובמשך השנים אני פיתחתי מין סוג של תיאוריה קטנה שלי שבעצם גיוס מקרנות הון סיכון מאוד דומה לאיך להתחיל עם בחורות. אז אני מקווה שזה יעבוד טוב, פעם ראשונה שאני מציג את זה היום. למעשה אני לקחתי מצגת שמסבירה איך להתחיל עם בחורות, והוספתי קצת דיקשנרי באמצע, כל מיני שקופיות של דיקשנרי שמסביר מה זה מה, זאת אומרת איך אנחנו נייחס את זה למה שמעניין אותנו. נתחיל מהדיקשנרי הראשון. Guys זה entrepreneurs, this is the girls the venture capitals. עכשיו בוא נלמד עליהם קצת. יש לי גם פה, אני אסתכל אחורה. נשים, הן חשדניות, הן זהירות באופן טבעי. דרך אגב, זה קשור להתפתחות שלנו הגנטית בטבע. בעצם העובדה שאישה צריכה לשאת תינוק ברחמה 9 חודשים, וגבר באופן תיאורטי יכול להכפיל את אוכלוסיית העולם תוך 24 שעות, נוצר איזשהו אימבלנס. והאימבלנס הזה מגדיר שהגברים יכולים להיות פחות סלקטיביים, והנשים צריכות להיות יותר סלקטיביות, ובגלל זה לא רק במין האנושי, אלא גם כמעט בכל חיה אפשרית, הגבר רודף אחרי האישה. זה פשוט טבעו של עולם, זה לא תופעה תרבותית. הן רוצות שתרצה אותם. זאת אומרת, עם כל הכבוד שהן זהירות, והן לא... אתם יודעים מה, אולי אני אדבר בשפת ה-VCs, בשפת הקרנות, ונשאיר את המצגת בשפת הגברים נשים. הקרנות רוצות שתרצה אותם. הן רוצות לעשות עליך ראש, הן רוצות שיזמים ירדפו אחריהם, הן פשוט רוצות לעשות את זה בזהירות. וכמו נשים שאוהבות promising guys, גבר שנראה שיש לו קריירה מבטיחה, שהוא עושה הרבה כסף, כל הפרופרטיז האלה שיש בחברות מצליחות, ביזמים מצליחים, זה בדיוק מה שעושה להם את זה. הן צריכות להשקיע בסוס מנצח. ומאוד מאוד אכפת להם מה החברות שלהם חושבות. זה באמת בעיה עם קרנות סיכון, זאת אומרת, הן ברות אחת עם השנייה, זה חשוב איזה קרנות גייסת קודם, איזה קרנות גייסת אחרי זה, יש לזה המון השפעה על התהליך גיוס שלך בדרך, והם לא אוהבות בחורים שמתחילים עם כל מה שזז. זאת אומרת, יזם שהולך עכשיו ל50 קרנות, 49 אומרות לו לא, זה לא פוזיציה טובה להיות בה. זאת אומרת, יש איזה נשיות כזאת. והן רוצות serious and long relationship. כמובן, sometimes manipulative. לא נמצאתי. Guys, show offs. תמיד מספרים לכולם כמה הם הכי טובים, כמה הם נהדרים, הם בטוחים שהם הכי טובים. הם מספרו לכל גבר שיוצאים בחור, בטוח שהוא גבר מספר 1 בעולם. וככה גם יזמים תמיד יספרו לקרן איך הם יזמים מנצחים, החברה שלהם הכי טובה שיש, והם הולכים לכבוש את השוק בסערה. אכפת להם הרפוטיישן של הקרן, והרבה פעמים לא מבינים רמזים. זאת אומרת, קרנות הרבה פעמים יבואו ויגידו, אולי בשלב אחר, יותר מאוחר, זה לא בדיוק מתאים לפורטפוליו שלנו. הרבה פעמים יזמים פספסים את זה ומנסים להמשיך לרדוף, לא בטוח שזה שווה. Over-promising. תמיד גברים בטבע שלהם מבטיחים יותר ממה שהם הולכים לקיים. הם יאהבו אותך לנצח, והם רוצים רק אותך, והכל, והרבה פעמים זה משתנה. אותו דבר יזמים, תמיד החברה זה הגיוס האחרון, לא יהיה יותר גיוסים, אנחנו רווחיים בסיבוב הבא. בסופו של דבר מגיעים ל-first contact, המפגש הראשון בין הגבר לאישה. אז כמו עם גברים ונשים, introduction is better than cold call. זאת אומרת, עכשיו אנחנו מגיעים לתכלס, אחרי שסקרנו, איך אנחנו עושים את התהליך, איך אנחנו ניגשים לתהליך, וכל הנושא של introduction ל-VCs הוא מאוד חשוב, כמו שהוא חשוב לנשים. הן לא רוצות לצאת עם אחד שהתחיל איתם בבר. מכירים את הקטע הזה? זה נחשב פחות טוב. כשמישהו עושה לך introduction, יש איזושהי ישות בדרך שאתה יכול לסמוך עליה. ולכן להגיע ל-VC, כל VC דרך introduction זה הדרך הכי טובה להגיע אליו. זה כלל מאוד חשוב למי שרוצה לגייס כסף. וכמו נשים, לא ללכת בכוח, הדרך הכי טובה להתחיל מאחורה זה לא להתחיל איתה, למעשה, זה מה שאני מנסה להגיד. הדרך הכי טובה זה להיות באזור, להיות בסביבה, לגרום לה לרצות אותך, לא ישר לרוץ אחריה ולהגיד לה, בואי נצא, את רוצה להיות חברה שלי. זה turn off. מהסיבה הפשוטה בגלל שמדובר פה בהחלטה פסיכולוגית, בסופו של דבר, יש ל-VCs נטייה טבעית לא לרצות את מי שמאוד רוצה אותם. מה שמביא אותי לנקודה הבאה, אם אתה מסוגל להגיע ל-VCs שההצעה תבוא ממנו, שהוא יבוא אליך ויגיד, אולי נדבר על השקעה בחברה שלך, זה הנקודה הכי טובה שאפשר להגיע אליה. זה קרה לי כמה פעמים במשך חיי, וכל פעם שזה קרה זה נגמר בהשקעה באמת. כש-VC, זה גם קרה לנו פעם, כש-VC מגיע אליך ואומר, אני אוהב את מה שאני רואה, זה מעניין אותי, זה לא הגיע דרך פרזנטציה, זה הגיע מסביב, זה דרך איזה היכרות, דרך איזה שיחת התייעצות, דרך איזה שיחה היכרות, והוא בא אליך והוא מציע שאולי דברו על השקעה, זה פוזיציה מאוד מאוד טובה להיות ביזם. ולהרשים בלי לנסות להרשים, זאת אומרת, תעשה את הרושם הנכון, תראה שאתה טוב, אבל בלי כל היום להתקשר ולספר כמה אני טוב, כמה אני גדול. עוד פעם, לנסות יותר מדי בכל תהליך של הגיוס הון, זה סוג של turn off. בסופו של דבר מדובר בהחלטה אינטואיטיבית. אף אחד לא מסוגל לנתח את כל הנתונים שצריך לנתח בשביל לעשות השקעה. זה פשוט יותר מדי נתונים, יותר מדי נעלמים, יותר מדי ספקולציות. ההחלטה האינטואיטיבית היא לגבי האנשים, לגבי איך אני מרגיש לגבי החברה הזאת, לגבי איך אני מרגיש לגבי הביזנס מודל, איך אני מרגיש לגבי היזמים. כשמדברים על החלטות אינטואיטיביות, אנחנו מדברים עם האינטואיציה של הבן אדם, לא רק עם השכל וההיגיון שלו, אנחנו מדברים עם האינטואיציה של ה-VCs. אז חשוב לטפל גם באזורים היותר אבסטרקטיים האלה של המוח. The courtship, החיזור. תהליך החיזור, תהליך חשוב מאוד. מתחיל תמיד באיזה occasion, באופן עקרוני, החיזור זה פגישות, בלי התחייבות ממש, נפגשים, רואים, מדברים, עוד אין שום תכלס על השולחן. מה שחשוב לגברים לדעת בשלב הזה, אל תתנהג כמו לוזר. זאת אומרת, כמו שאתה לא מתקשר לבחורה כל יום לשאול אותה מתי את רוצה לצאת איתי פעם הבאה, זה גם לא רעיון טוב לעשות את זה ל-VC. לרדוף אחריו זה משהו שמסמן לו שאתה נואש. זאת אומרת, אם הוא כזה טוב, למה הוא רודף אחריי כל כך הרבה? שמוביל אותי למסקנה, אולי, נשים, יש משפט מאוד נכון, נשים לא רוצות גברים שרוצים אותם. זה כלל שהוא מאוד נכון ב-VCs. אתה צריך תמיד להיראות טיפה עסוק, אפשר לרמוז על ההזדמנויות האחרות שיש לך. בדרך כלל החברות שמקבלות גיוס הכי מהר זה חברות שמדברות אותם כמה קרנות, חברות שיש בהן עניין מכמה מקומות, זה החברות פתאום שהזמנים מתקצרים לשבועות בודדים. אני חושב שאנחנו הצלחנו לעשות זה באמת הקפה, בגלל שהיו לנו כמה הצעות על השולחן במשך שבועיים, לסגור סיבוב שלם מההתחלה עד הסוף. למה? בגלל שהם ידעו שיש כמה שהם מדברים איתנו והם רצו לזוז מאוד מאוד מהר. אבל תמיד בשלב הזה be kind and polite. עכשיו עוד דיקשנרי למי שמכיר את המינוח. למעשה כשאתה הולך מתקדם בתהליך של הגיוס הון, בעצם מתקדם במשא ומתן שלך עם הקרן. אני לוקח פה, נגיד, את ההתקדמות ביחסים עם גברים ונשים. זה מתחיל מפרטנר דיסיז'ן, בשלב השני זה term sheet, שעדיין אפשר לצאת אבל לא ממש רוצים. שלב השלישי זה השקעה חלקית בחברה. זה לפעמים קורה, שלנו למשל זה קרה ש-VC בא ואמר אנחנו ניתן לכם עכשיו $500,000 ולגבי השקעה רצינית של $3 מיליון או $4 מיליון בוא נראה עוד חצי שנה. וכמובן ההום רן זה ההשקעה מלאה בחברה, השקעת VC לכל דבר. אני משווה את זה במערכת יחסים לרגע שהצדדים, איך לומר, נכנסו למיטה. ושם מאזן הכוחות פתאום משתנה קצת. זה פשוט טבע הדברים. באותו רגע, ה-VC מתחיל לרדוף אחריך. זאת אומרת, אם עד היום אתה רדפת אחריו, פתאום הוא תתקשר אליי, תספר לי מה קורה, תעדכן אותי, למה אתה לא מדבר איתי, תתייעץ איתי, הכל משתנה באותו רגע, זה רגע אחד, ממש אפשר לשים את השעון עליו. היא לא רוצה שתעזוב אותה. זאת אומרת, בוא נגיד, VC שהשקיע ביזם, ועכשיו היזם ככה מתרחק ממנו, זה לא מקום טוב להיות בו. בשלב הזה הוא רוצה שאתה תעבוד איתו. היא רוצה שתדבר איתה, שתעדכן אותה, שתעשה board meetings. שלב אני אומר, there is more to it beyond sex, בגלל שמערכת יחסים עם VCs, גם אחרי שנכנסת לפאזה הזאת שהם כבר השקיעו בחברה, זה לא חייב להיות תמיד המערכת יחסים שאני צריך להסביר להם את עצמי כל הזמן, והם יחליפו את המנכ"ל, והם יפטרו את היזמים. זאת אומרת, לי היה באופן אישי ניסיון מאוד מאוד טוב עם קרנות שבאמת עברנו את התהליך הזה, וגייסנו את הכסף מהם, ובעצם קיבלנו המון value בצורה של עצות נכונות מתי שצריך, שמתבססות על זה שהקרן מושקעת בחברות אחרות, והיא רואה הרבה יותר דברים ממה שאני רואה. אנחנו קיבלנו value בזכות היכרות לאנשים שעזרו לנו מהלך הדרך, ולכן חשוב כמובן לזכור את כל הדברים האלה, אבל כמו במערכת יחסים עם חברה, תמיד יהיה מישהו שם בשביל לבקר אותך. שזה לפעמים טוב, זה לפעמים רע, אבל זה פשוט המצב. דיקשנרי 3. אוקיי. עכשיו יש סטטוס של מערכות יחסים. כשאתם יוצאים, 10% VC share בחברה, זה כמו גבר ואישה שיוצאים ביחד קבוע. אם אתם כבר גרים ביחד, 30% VC share בחברה זה בערך ההקבלה. הוא כבר חלק מהחיים שלך, הוא ה-VC, הוא חלק חשוב בחברה שלך, קשה מאוד להתקדם בלעדיו, זה כבר מעורבות הרבה יותר גדולה. ובשלב האחרון, מריג' יש לו שליטה. בשלב של השליטה, הוא יכול להחליט לך, אם הוא רוצה שאתה תהיה בחברה, שלא תהיה בחברה, הוא יכול להחליט אם למכור את החברה או לא למכור את החברה. למעשה ל-VC יש המון כוח. כמו נשים שאתה נשוי להם, בלי פרינאפ. ולמעשה, אולי כאילו לסכם את כל מה שאני אמרתי פה, חלק גדול מלדעת לגייס כסף זה באיזשהו מקום לנסות להיראות אפילו יותר מוצלח, או להיראות יותר טוב בעיני מי שבא ובודק אותך, בגלל שאנחנו נמצאים בעולם שיש הרבה יזמים, הרבה הזדמנויות והרבה חברות. ה-VCs יש להם משאבים מוגבלים. המשאבים מוגבלים שלהם זה הקרן שלהם, זה הכסף שלהם, והם צריכים לבחור איפה להשקיע את זה. בסופו של דבר, הם עושים את זה על בסיס של gut feeling. בסופו של דבר, הם מרגישים שזה נכון, הם מרגישים שזה היזם הנכון, הם מרגישים שזה החברה הנכונה, והם הולכים והם עושים את ההשקעה. ובגלל שאנחנו מתעסקים פה עם רגש, שהוא בהגדרה דבר לא רציונלי, אנחנו לפעמים צריכים להשתמש בכלים לא רציונליים. לא רק בכלים רציונליים, לא רק באקסל ספרדשיטס, לא רק בפאורפוינטס מאוד מתוחכמים, אלא לפעמים גם בכלים לא רציונליים בשביל להתמודד עם דבר שהוא לא רציונלי. וזה מסר שאני למדתי במשך השנים, אני חושב שזה לקח חשוב, אני מקווה שתיקחו אותו מפה. בסדר, תודה רבה.
Do we have any questions at all from the audience? Everyone wants to go home. Do we have anyone here want? Oh, we do have questions before we end. Go ahead.
החלוקה הייתה נראה כל פעם שגייסתי עם נולי, זה חוויה נושאת פרזנטציה ואני הייתי עונה על השאלות. זה תהליך שבסופו של דבר כל נושא ה-negotiation על המספרים ועל הסעיפים בהיסטוריה שלי אני לא התעסקתי בזה כל כך הרבה. ארנון הוא עורך דין, אז הוא עשה את זה בקונטקט, במטה קפה, אריק, גם עורך דין, אבל אז הוא עשה את זה אצלנו, לפני זה המחקר הזה גם אריק עשה את זה, אני בעיקר הייתי בצד של פרזנטציה, מוסר, ויז'ן, ודווקא פחות אני טיפלתי באופן אישי בכל נושא ה-negotiation, על הסעיפים, החוזה ובטח. לא, זה היה בדרך כלל בכל פגישה, אם הייתה פגישה מהותית, פגישה שאמורה לעשות אססמנט לחברה, של היינו רוצים להשקיע בה או לא, היינו מגיעים 2 או 3 אנשים מהחברה, וזה גם חשוב לדעתי, כי זה המקום שבו אתה מראה שיש לך פה צוות שיודע לעבוד ביחד, וצוות שמשלים אחד את השני, ואני כן חושב שזה נכון, כי במקום שבו מדברים על הסעיפים ומה עושים במצב של דאונראונד וכל המון עבודה שיש לעשות בתחום הזה, אז כן זה יכול להיות בן אדם אחד, והוא צריך להיות כמובן מישהו הכי קווליפייד מהגרופ לעשות את זה מה שאף פעם לא עשת ביעני.
Do we have another question over there? No?
אני רוצה דווקא להתייחס לנושא שעלה ולא כך איך בסוף המצגת של אייל, של גל, לגבי הנושא הזה של המצגות שעושים ל-VC, זה כאילו שצריך להעמיד פנים לשחק במשחק של להיות מאוד אטרקטיבי. כל הנושא הזה של יזמים הוא בעצם נושא מסוים של יצירת יש מאין, אוקיי? בסופו של דבר כולנו לוקחים משהו ומצפים לעשות alternative investment ממש בלתי סביר על כסף עם איזשהו רעיון שבדרך כלל יש לו מתחרים, יש דברים הרבה יותר טובים שכבר עובדים. זאת אומרת, זה בעצם, אם אתה מסוגל לעשות את זה, אם הרעיון של ה-VC זאת אומרת, אם הצלחת למכור לי, אתה בטח גם תצליח למכור לאחרים, וזה מה שקובע. אני חושבת שזה חלק מאותו הקטע שמסתכלים ואומרים, האססמנט הפסיכולוגי הזה, האם הבן אדם הזה באמת מסוגל לקחת את כל הדברים ולבנות משהו שבסופו של דבר ייצר את הערך המוסף הגבוה הזה. וזה קצת מזכיר לי גם, היה סרט נחמד עם אנג'ליקה יוסטון שהיא תפקה בחורה שעובדת במאפיה, והיא עושה כל מיני הימורים וסוסים וכל מיני דברים כאלה בשביל הבוס שלה, ובאיזשהו שלב הוא תופס אותה ואומר, הוא מגלה שהיא מרמה אותו וגונבת ממנו כסף, ואומר, מה? גונב, הנה אני חושבת את מה זה. But Joe, if I couldn't take care of myself, I couldn't take care of you. כן, שעזר.
Question in the back. Let's make sure everyone can hear you, man.
אתם באמת דיברתם על הנושא גם של הגיוס של הדברים האלה, והוא לדעת לעשות אותם, אבל תמיד התחיל להתעלת מה מצב הטכנולוגי בכלל? האם נכון מבחינתי לנסות לענות לאתגר של יודע מי שיעשה את זה, או לנסות למצוא מישהו שתתחיל לתפקיד מול החברות ולהגיד אני כן מודעת, אני לא בן אדם הכי נכון לעשות ככה.
בדרך כלל את עבודת צוות, זה לא רק בדרך. בדרך כלל כל דבר כזה, כל יזמות זה בדרך כלל עבודת צוות. כשהיום להקים משהו, בכל מקרה לבד.
אני שומע את זה די הרבה, של למצוא מישהו. כל הרעיון הזה של למצוא מישהו, יש לי רעיון ואני רוצה למצוא מישהו, יש לי מוצר ואני צריך מישהו שיכול לבנות אותו, זה כל כך מהותי המישהו הזה. זאת אומרת, אתה לא חברה שאין לך את המישהו. הצוות הוא העניין. זאת אומרת, ולמצוא מישהו זה לא שדרך חבר או דרך מספר טלפון אני הייתי עד בחיי לדברים מאוד לא טובים שקרו משני אנשים שהתחברו לצורך מטרה. בלי איזשהו רקע הרבה יותר עמוק ובסיסי זאת אומרת, ראיתי בכמה פעמים זה נורא, זה החוויה הכי גרועה שיכולה להיות בחברה. תמצא מישהו אחר תחשוב מה לעשות איתו. זה יותר חשוב מהרעיון. תקים את הצוות ואז תמצא את המוצא הכי טוב לעשות. זה לא לי. מישהו שיעשה לך ממש. להתחיל מזה שיש לך צוות שמסוגל בין שאר הדברים שהוא מסוגל לעשות משא ומתן. זה נקודת הפתיחה שלך. עכשיו, משם נמשיך. זה הגישה שלי.
מה שניסיתי לשאול, שוב, על גילתכם, מגלומכם, האם נכון באמת בכלל לחפש? להגיד, אוקיי, אני חושב לא יודע אולי את הכל, אבל בוא אני אעשה את המאמצים, ואני בין הסופר, וכך זה יש לי את השם. מותר קיים, רק קיימת, דברים קיימים, אבל לנו המומחיות בחלק היותר אישי שמומחים.
אין לעשות איזה בלי איזה אישי.
אני אתן לך תשובה, תראה. בכל חברה, אתה בצוות העולם זה מתחלק לשניים. הצד הטכנולוגי, הפיסטולי, והצד העסקי. אני מכיר מעט מאוד אנשים שיכולים לעשות שני הדברים האלו ולהצליח טוב בשניהם. אני אקח את זה לנקודת קיצון ששם אני, שזה לבד בפער בזמן, שהולך לתהליכים מאוד מאוד מורכבים כמו הנפקה, אם אין צוות שתומך ב-CEO בזמן תהליך ההנפקה, היום שאחרי ההנפקה הוא היום הראשון לכישלון קולוסלי, כי החברה מתפרקת פשוט. אז בפער דיזיין, המשפט שלי, הוא נראה את החברה בפועל, אני לא נראה את החברה, אני נראה את השיווק, ואחר מכן גיוסי ההון. השורה התחתונה, מבחינת ההמלצות שלי, היא הצוות חייב להיות מאוזן באופן כזה שהוא יוכל לתמוך אחד בשני בכל התהליכים האלה. אותו דבר במשא ומתן מורכב, גיוסי הון, משברים, בן אדם אחד לא יכול לעשות את כל החברה על עצמו, זה לא עובד. וזה לא מישהו, זה שותף. קוראים לו שותף למישהו.
וגם יותר גרוע מניסויים יותר. רואים אותו יותר.
עוד שאלה שם.
יזמים מנוסים, בדרך כלל אומרים, תבנה חברה לא כדי שיקנו, תבנה חברה מצליחה, כבר יבוא מישהו ויקנה אותה. אבל אל תשים את הקנייה במטרה. ואז נספר לציבור שאת יודעת מההתחלה ששמת את הקנייה במטרה. איך אתם מתייחסים לזה?
אני למעשה לא יכולה להגיד שראיתי את הקנייה, שאני באתי למייקרוסופט לא היה לי מושג שאני הולכת לקבל הצעה לקנייה, כי אף אחד לא מכר אף שום דבר לאף אחד עד אותו זמן, פרט לאורנה ברי, שעשתה איזושהי עסקה שרוב אנשים לא יודעים עליה לסימנס, איזה חצי שנה קודם לכן. אבל לא הייתה אף עסקת מחירה בשוק, כך שזה לא היה משהו שחירה היה אופציה. מה שאני רציתי, זה חשבתי שאני לא אוכל לעשות את זה בעצמי, הייתי משוכנעת שעל מנת להגיע לחו"ל אני אהיה צריכה פרטנרית. לא חשבתי על מכירת החברה, חשבתי יותר על מערכת שיווק משותף, שיווק שם, שיווק פה, עסקאות אוריין, עסקאות פעם, כל הדברים הקלאסיים האלה. אבל בניתי את זה באוריינטציה הזאת, חשבתי מה יביא את הוואליו המקסימלי, מה יאפשר לי להגיע לשם בצורה הכי טובה.
Is that it? Okay, I think Ed wants to, I'm never going to be able to look at you the same, Ed, after that presentation. Okay.
I have nothing more to say except thank you to all our wonderful speakers, not including myself, of course, and thanking all of you for staying so long. I can't believe it. And incidentally, chutzpah, you would get drummed out of an American auditorium. God forbid you should try it in England. It was a stimulating evening, and I think I learned more, certainly, than I thought, and I thank you all very much for coming. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.